Single dad rejected from job for no experience. They laughed as he walked out in the rain, but days later, the same company was on its knees, begging him back, because the richest client in town refused to work with anyone else. Before we get into the story, comment below where in the world you are watching from today. The morning sun crept through thin curtains, casting soft shadows across the small apartment's worn carpet. The golden light illuminated dust motes dancing in the air, highlighting the careful way Daniel McCall had arranged their modest belongings to create a sense of home. He stood in the doorway of his daughter's bedroom, his calloused hands gripping the doorframe as his heart warmed at the sight of Emma's peaceful sleep. Her stuffed giraffe, a gift from Sarah during better times, lay tucked under one arm, while her dark curls spread across the pillow like a fan, the same curls Sarah used to braid every morning before school. "Rise and shine, sweetheart," he called softly, his voice carrying the gentle authority of a father who'd learned to be both parent and protector. He stepped into the room, carefully avoiding the squeaky floorboard near her dresser, and gently touched her shoulder. Time for another beautiful day. Emma stirred beneath her worn quilt, the one with tiny roses that had belonged to her mother. Her eyes fluttered open, still heavy with sleep and dreams. "5 more minutes, Daddy?" she mumbled, pulling her blanket closer to her chin in that universal child's gesture of resistance to morning. Daniel chuckled, the sound rich and warm in the quiet room. "Not today, princess. Remember, today's the big day." He sat on the edge of her bed, feeling the old mattress dip under his weight. The springs had seen better days, but it was comfortable enough, and more importantly, it was theirs. At those words, Emma's eyes lit up like Christmas morning. She sat up straight in bed, suddenly wide awake, her hair sticking, up in impossible directions. "Your interview. Did you iron your lucky shirt?" She bounced slightly on the mattress, her excitement infectious. "Sure did," Daniel replied, smoothing down the front of his pale blue button-down with careful pride. It wasn't exactly lucky, it was just the only dress shirt he owned that didn't show excessive wear at the collar or frayed cuffs from years of washing. But Emma had declared it his lucky shirt last month, after he'd worn it to the parent-teacher conference, where Mrs. Martinez had praised Emma's kindness. And who was he to argue with 8-year-old logic? The shirt hung on his lean frame, pressed with the care of a man who understood that presentation mattered, especially when you couldn't afford a second chance. He'd spent 20 minutes last night working out every wrinkle with their temperamental iron, the one that only worked if you held the cord just right. In the kitchen, their old coffee maker gurgled and sputtered like a dying engine, filling the small space with the rich, comforting aroma of coffee. Daniel had bought the machine secondhand 3 years ago, and it protested every morning like an old friend reluctant to start the day. He pulled out Emma's favorite cereal bowl, the one with cartoon puppies around the rim that she'd picked out herself during a rare trip to the dollar store, while his eyes drifted to the wrinkled resume spread on the counter. "Project manager, construction foreman, team leadership," he muttered under his breath, his finger trailing down the page with the reverence of a man studying scripture. The black text seemed to mock him with its gaps and outdated references. The date stared back at him accusingly, a 3-year chasm where he'd left his career to care for Sarah during her illness, then focused on raising Emma alone through those dark months of grief and adjustment. How could he explain that gap without mentioning the sleepless nights spent holding Sarah's hand in the grated hospital, the mornings when getting Emma dressed and fed felt like climbing a mountain, the way he'd had to learn to braid hair from YouTube videos and figure out which tears meant "I'm hurt" versus "I miss mommy"? "Daddy, the coffee's doing that funny noise again," Emma called out, now dressed in her school uniform, a navy jumper and white blouse that he'd pressed the night before. Her hair still looked like she'd wrestled with her pillow and lost, dark curls sticking up at angles that defied gravity. Daniel rushed to rescue the coffee maker, which was indeed making an alarming grinding sound that suggested its mechanical death might be imminent. "Come here, let me fix your hair," he said, grabbing Emma's brush from the counter, a pink plastic thing with a few missing bristles that had somehow become their most essential morning tool. As he gently worked through the tangles, careful not to pull too hard because Emma was tender-headed just like her mother, he practiced his interview answers under his breath. The familiar ritual of preparing her for school helped calm his nerves. "Yes, Mr. Holton, I have extensive experience in project management and team coordination." "No, sir. The gap in my employment was due to family responsibilities that have now been resolved. I'm ready to commit fully to this position and contribute to your company's success." The words felt stiff and rehearsed, even to his own ears. like lines from a play he'd never quite learned how to perform convincingly. Emma munched on her cereal, her small feet swinging from the kitchen chair as she watched him with serious brown eyes, Sarah's eyes, so deep and knowing they sometimes made his breath catch. "You're going to get the job, Daddy," she said with the complete certainty that only children possess, the kind of faith that believes good things happen to good people. Mrs. Martinez says positive thinking makes good things happen, and you think the most positive thoughts of anyone I know. Daniel smiled, his heart squeezing with love as he touched the tip of her nose with his index finger. "Your teacher is a wise woman." He glanced at the wall clock, another second-hand find that ran 5 minutes fast but kept them punctual and quickened his movements. "Finish up, sweetheart. We need to get going." The drive to school was filled with Emma's animated chatter about her upcoming science project on butterflies and the class hamster's latest adventures in escape artistry. Daniel listened with half his attention, grateful for her ability to make every ordinary day feel bright with possibility, while the other half of his mind rehearsed answers and worried about making the right impression. His pickup truck, a 15-year-old Ford with a dent in the passenger door and a radio that only worked when it wanted to, rumbled through the familiar streets of their neighborhood. The morning air was crisp through the partially open windows, carrying the scent of autumn leaves and the promise of change. As they pulled up to Jefferson Elementary School, a modest brick building that had seen better decades but still radiated warmth and purpose, Emma suddenly grabbed his hand with both of hers. Her small fingers were sticky from breakfast, but he didn't mind. "Remember what you promised? About the pink bike?" Daniel's throat tightened as he thought about the bicycle that had been sitting in the window of Marshall's Sporting Goods for 3 weeks now. Emma stopped to admire it every time they walked past, pressing her nose against the glass like it held all her dreams. The price tag, $127.99, might as well have been $1,000 given their current financial situation. "When I get this job, that bike is yours. Cross my heart and hope to die." Emma beamed with the radiance of pure joy and hugged him tight, her small arms barely reaching around his neck. "You're the best daddy ever," she whispered, her breath warm against his ear before hopping out of the truck with the boundless energy of childhood. Daniel watched her skip up the school steps, her backpack bouncing with each step until she disappeared through the heavy wooden doors. Only then did he allow himself a moment of vulnerability, his hands gripping the steering wheel as he whispered, "Lord, I know I've asked for a lot lately, but this one's not just for me. This little girl deserves better than I've been able to give her." The drive to Holton Construction seemed both an eternity and an instant, time playing tricks on his nervous mind. Daniel's pickup truck looked painfully out of place. Among the shiny vehicles in the corporate parking lot, sleek sedans, and luxury SUVs that probably cost more than he made in a year when he was working regularly. He parked in the back corner, hoping his truck's modest appearance wouldn't prejudice anyone against him before he even walked through the door. He checked his reflection in the rearview mirror one final time, straightening his tie with fingers that trembled slightly despite his efforts to stay calm. The blue fabric was slightly faded from countless washings, but Emma had helped him tie the perfect Windsor knot using a YouTube video they'd watched together the night before. She'd been so proud of her teaching skills, declaring him the most handsome daddy in the whole world. Taking a deep breath that tasted of morning coffee and determination, Daniel grabbed his folder of certificates and references every piece of paper that proved his worth as a worker and a man. The morning sun reflected off the building's glass facade, almost blindingly bright, like a beacon of either hope or judgment. He squared his shoulders, the way his father had taught him to do when facing difficult situations, and walked toward the entrance with measured, purposeful steps. Inside, the lobby was a world apart from his small apartment, cool and pristine, with modern artwork on the walls that probably cost more than his monthly rent, and sleek furniture that looked like it belonged in a magazine. The air conditioning hummed quietly, and the marble floors gleamed under recessed lighting. Everything spoke of success and prosperity, the kind of environment where important decisions were made by important people. The receptionist, a middle-aged woman with kind eyes and silver hair styled in a professional bob, looked up as he approached her polished granite desk. Her smile was genuine, cutting through some of his nervousness. "Good morning," Daniel said, his voice steady despite the butterflies performing acrobatics in his stomach. "I'm Daniel McCall. I have an interview with Mr. Holton at 9 o'clock. Behind him, Emma settled into one of the plush leather chairs that probably cost more than his truck, already pulling out her beloved coloring book and the worn box of crayons she carried everywhere. The receptionist's face softened as she noticed the little girl, her professional demeanor warming with maternal instinct. "Please have a seat, Mr. McCall," she said, gesturing toward the seating area where Emma had made herself comfortable. "Someone will be with you shortly. Can I get you some coffee? Water for your daughter?" Daniel sat next to Emma, the leather chair so different from their secondhand furniture at home that he felt like an imposter. He watched as she carefully selected a purple crayon for her drawing, a house with flowers in the yard, and stick figures that he knew represented their family, including the angel figure that was always Sarah watching over them. His resume felt heavy in his hands, each page containing hopes and dreams that extended far beyond mere employment. This wasn't just a job interview, it was a lifeline thrown to a drowning man, a chance to rebuild their life from the ground up, to give Emma the stability and security she deserved, to prove that faith and hard work still meant something in a world that often seemed to reward the wrong things. As he sat there, surrounded by the quiet luxury of corporate success, Daniel McCall carried with him the prayers of a desperate father, the memory of a beloved wife, and the unshakable belief that somehow, some way, everything would work out exactly as it was meant to. Daniel's polished dress shoes clicked against the marble floor as he followed Miss Dorsey down the long hallway. His hand brushed against his tie one last time, making sure it lay perfectly straight. The corridor seemed to stretch endlessly, each step echoing with the weight of his hopes. "Right through here, Mr. McCall, Miss," Dorsey said, her voice professionally detached as she held open a heavy wooden door. The conference room was impressive, with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. 3 people sat around a gleaming mahogany table, their faces illuminated by the gray morning light. Mr. Rollins, a man with salt and pepper hair and sharp eyes, sat at the center. He barely glanced up from the paper in his hands, Daniel's resume. "Please, take a seat, miss." Dorsey gestured to the single chair across from the panel as she settled into her own place beside them. Daniel lowered himself into the chair, trying to keep his breathing steady. The leather squeaked slightly beneath him, seeming impossibly loud in the quiet room. On the table, his portfolio lay unopened, the edges of his certificates peeking out neatly. "So, Mr. McCall," Mr. Rollins began, his tone clipped and businesslike. "I see you were a construction foreman at Barrett Building Company." He paused, eyebrows raised. 8 years ago." Daniel leaned forward slightly, his voice steady despite the nervousness churning in his stomach. "Yes, sir. I supervised crews of up to 30 men, managing multiple residential projects simultaneously. We consistently finished ahead of schedule and under budget." The HR manager, a woman with thick-rimmed glasses, made a small note on her pad without looking up. The silence that followed felt heavy. "And since then?" Miss Dorsey prompted, her pen poised above her notepad. Daniel's throat tightened slightly, but he kept his voice clear. "My wife became ill with cancer. I made the decision to step back from full-time work to care for her and our daughter." He paused, drawing a careful breath. "After Sarah passed, Emma was only 3. She needed me to be there for her." Mr. Rollins' expression remained unchanged as he shuffled through the papers. "During this gap, did you maintain any connection to the industry? Any part-time work or continuing education?" "I've done independent contracting work," Daniel explained, his hands clasped firmly in his lap. "Mostly residential renovations and repairs. I've kept up with building codes and new construction methods through online courses, but no formal employment," Mr. Rollins interrupted, setting down the resume with a slight frown. "No, sir," Daniel admitted, "but my experience—" "Mr. McCall?" Miss Dorsey cut in, her voice carrying a note of finality. "You've been out too long. We need someone with current experience." She closed her portfolio with a sharp snap. "The construction industry has changed significantly in the past 8 years. Daniel felt his chest tighten, but he kept his expression composed. "I understand things have changed, but my fundamental skills and leadership abilities—" "Thank you for coming in." Mr. Rollins stood abruptly, already gathering his papers. "We'll be in touch if anything suitable comes up." The dismissal was clear. Daniel rose slowly, his legs feeling heavy. "Thank you for your time," he managed, his voice steady despite the disappointment crushing his chest. The walk back down the hallway seemed shorter this time, each step carrying him away from the hope he'd carried into the building. In the lobby, Emma sat cross-legged on one of the plush chairs, her favorite coloring book open on her lap. She looked up as he approached, her bright smile fading slightly as she caught his expression. "Ready to go, sweetheart?" Daniel asked, forcing warmth into his voice. He helped her gather her things, tucking the coloring book into her small backpack. Outside, the sky had darkened. Fat raindrops began to fall as they hurried to his old pickup truck, the water spotting Daniel's carefully pressed shirt. He helped Emma into her booster seat, making sure she was securely buckled before climbing into the driver's seat. The windshield wipers squeaked across the glass as they pulled away from the building. The rain grew heavier, making the traffic lights blur into watery stars. Daniel's hands gripped the steering wheel tightly, his knuckles white with tension. Emma's small voice broke the silence. "Did they give you the job, Daddy?" Daniel glanced in the rearview mirror, catching her worried expression. He forced his lips into a smile, though his heart felt heavy in his chest. "Not this time, sweetheart." The rain continued to fall as they drove away from Holton Construction, the building's impressive silhouette disappearing into the gray mist behind them. The rain drummed steadily against the truck's roof as Daniel navigated the slick roads. Emma had fallen quiet in the back seat, humming softly to herself while drawing patterns in the foggy window with her finger. His mind kept replaying the interview, each dismissive glance and cutting word making his stomach twist. Through the heavy curtain of rain, a set of flashing hazard lights caught his attention. A silver Mercedes sat partially pulled onto the shoulder, its right rear tire visibly flat. An elderly woman in a light blue raincoat stood beside the car, one hand pressed against the vehicle for support as she peered down at the damaged tire. Daniel's foot eased off the accelerator. He glanced in the rearview mirror at Emma, then at his watch. They had time. "Sweetheart, we're going to help someone, okay?" he said, already signaling to pull over. Emma perked up, pressing her face against the window. "Like Mommy used to?" The innocent question made Daniel's heart ache. Sarah had always stopped to help others, no matter the circumstance. Exactly like Mommy used to. He parked the truck several feet behind the Mercedes, hazard lights blinking in solidarity. "Stay here where it's dry, Emma. I'll be right back." The rain immediately soaked through his dress shirt as he approached the stranded vehicle. The elderly woman turned at his footsteps, her face lined with dignity despite her obvious distress. She held herself with a certain grace, even in this unfortunate situation. "Ma'am," Daniel called out, over the sound of passing cars and rain, "do you need some help?" The woman adjusted her wire-rimmed glasses, studying him carefully. "Oh, you're very kind, but I wouldn't want to trouble you. I've called my service company, though they're taking their time about it." "It's no trouble," Daniel assured her, already kneeling to examine the tire. The rubber was shredded. She must have hit something sharp. "I can have this changed in just a few minutes. No sense in you waiting out here in this weather. You'll ruin your nice clothes," she protested, though he could hear the relief in her voice. Daniel smiled, his shirt already plastered to his skin. "They're already pretty well ruined, ma'am. I'm Daniel McCall, by the way." "Eleanor Briggs," she replied, watching as he efficiently located her spare tire and jack. "Please, at least let me hold an umbrella over you while you work." "Thank you, Mrs. Briggs, but I'm already soaked through. Why don't you wait in my truck where it's dry? My daughter Emma's in the back seat. I'm sure she'd love some company." Mrs. Briggs hesitated, then nodded. "You're very thoughtful, Mr. McCall." As Daniel worked on changing the tire, he could hear muffled conversation and occasional laughter from his truck. The familiar motions of loosening lug nuts and positioning the jack helped settle his mind, pushing away the morning's disappointment. This, at least, was something he could fix. The rain had eased to a steady drizzle by the time he secured the last bolt on the spare tire. His fingers were numb from the cold, and his once-pressed shirt clung to him like a second skin. Mrs. Briggs emerged from the truck as he was storing the flat tire in her trunk. "Mr. McCall, you're an absolute blessing," she said, her voice warm with gratitude. "Let me compensate you for your time and trouble." She reached into her purse, but Daniel held up a hand. "Just glad to help, ma'am," he said simply, wiping his hands on his already ruined slacks. Mrs. Briggs studied him for a moment, her eyes kind but shrewd. "You know, you remind me of someone I once loved very much." She glanced at his truck, where Emma waved cheerfully through the window. "Someone who believed that kindness matters more than convenience." Daniel ducked his head, unsure how to respond to the gentle observation. He closed her trunk with a solid thunk. "The spare tire will get you where you need to go, but you'll want to have it replaced as soon as possible." "Thank you again, Mr. McCall," Mrs. Briggs said. She watched as he walked back to his truck, the rain creating small rivers in the worn asphalt between them. Through his side mirror, Daniel could see Mrs. Briggs still standing beside her car, watching as his old pickup merged back into traffic. Emma chattered excitedly about their new friend, but Daniel's thoughts were on Mrs. Briggs's last words, and how they echoed something Sarah used to say about kindness being its own reward. The rain continued its steady pattern as they drove on, the Mercedes growing smaller in the distance behind them. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across Daniel's tiny mailbox as he trudged up the cracked sidewalk. Bills, bills, and more bills, that's all he expected to find. But tucked between the usual white envelopes was a cream-colored note, handwritten in elegant script. "What's that, Daddy?" Emma asked. Skipping beside him, Daniel unfolded the paper carefully. "Dear Mr. McCall," he read aloud, "I would be honored if you and your lovely daughter would join me for tea tomorrow afternoon at 3 o'clock. Consider it my way of properly thanking you for your kindness. Address enclosed. Warmly, Eleanor Briggs." Emma's eyes lit up. "Oh, can we go, please?" Daniel hesitated. "I don't know, sweetheart. We shouldn't impose, but she invited us." Emma's lower lip trembled. "And you said we should always be polite when people are nice to us." He couldn't help but smile at her, using his own words against him. "You've got me there, kiddo." The next day, they stood before an impressive Victorian house with white trim and a wraparound porch. Window boxes overflowed with bright flowers, and a neat stone path led through a well-tended garden. "It looks like a fairy tale house," Emma whispered, clutching Daniel's hand. Before they could knock, the door swung open. Mrs. Briggs stood there beaming, her silver hair neatly styled and her clothes speaking of quiet elegance. "Right on time," she said warmly. "Please, come in." The interior was like stepping into a museum of memories. Antique furniture gleamed with polish, and family photos covered the walls. Daniel noticed several showing a handsome man in military dress uniform. "That's George, my late husband," Mrs. Briggs explained, following his gaze. 42 years together, and he never stopped opening doors for me." She led them into a sunny sitting room where a tea service waited on a low table. "I wasn't sure what kind of cookies children like these days, so I made an assortment." Emma's eyes widened at the plate of treats. "They all look yummy." "Such nice manners," Mrs. Briggs smiled, pouring tea into delicate cups. "Do you like gardens, Emma? I noticed you admiring my flowers." "Oh, yes." Emma nodded eagerly. "At school, we're growing sunflowers. Mine's the tallest in class." "Is that so? Well, I have something to show you." Mrs. Briggs reached for a worn photo album. "These are pictures of my garden through the years. See those roses? They're called peace roses. They bloom even in winter." "Like angels in the snow," Emma declared. Mrs. Briggs laughed softly. "What a beautiful way to think of them." "Do you know about angels, dear? Mommy used to say they watch over us," Emma said quietly, "even though we can't see them." Daniel's throat tightened. Mrs. Briggs reached over and patted Emma's hand. "Your mommy was very wise. I believe angels come in many forms sometimes as people who help others without asking for anything in return." She glanced meaningfully at Daniel. The afternoon light softened as they talked. Daniel found himself opening up about things he rarely discussed: Sarah's illness, the mounting medical bills, the way he dropped everything to care for her and Emma. "The construction company understood at first," he explained, staring into his teacup. "But after Sarah passed, they'd already filled my position. Started over at entry-level jobs, but it wasn't enough for rent and daycare. Now everyone says I've been out of management too long." Mrs. Briggs listened intently, tears glistening in her eyes. "Life has asked much of you, Daniel. Yet here you are, still stopping to help strangers on rainy days." Emma had dozed off on the plush sofa, cookie crumbs on her dress. Daniel checked his watch reluctantly. "We should head home." "Thank you for everything, Mrs. Briggs." She walked them to the door, Emma sleepily holding Daniel's hand. "Sometimes, Mrs. Briggs said softly, God sends people into our lives for reasons we don't yet understand." Daniel smiled, unsure what she meant, but touched by her kindness. As they walked down the garden path, Emma waved back at Mrs. Briggs. "The roses really do look like angels," she murmured. The morning sun painted Mrs. Briggs' Victorian house in warm, amber hues as Daniel pulled up in his old pickup truck, the engine coughing its familiar wheeze before settling into silence. He'd noticed her struggling with grocery bags at the local market earlier, her thin arms trembling under the weight of paper sacks, while other shoppers hurried past without a glance. The sight had tugged at something deep in his chest. the same protective instinct that made him check on Emma 3 times each night. "Let me get those for you, Mrs. Briggs," Daniel said now, carefully balancing 3 paper bags in one arm while reaching for the heavy brass key that dangled from her weathered fingers. The bags rustled softly, filled with the simple necessities of a woman living alone: canned soup, fresh bread, milk that would likely outlast her appetite for it. "You're too kind, Daniel." She smiled, her silver hair neatly pinned back in a style that spoke of decades when appearances mattered more than convenience. "And please, call me Eleanor. After all the tea we've shared this week, I think we're past formalities, don't you?" The brass key turned with a satisfying click, and Daniel pushed open the heavy oak door, stepping aside to let her enter first. Inside, he set the groceries on her kitchen counter with the careful precision of a man who understood that even small things deserved respect. The warm scent of cinnamon and fresh bread enveloped him like a grandmother's embrace, mixing with the faint smell of lemon oil and old wood that spoke of a house lovingly maintained through many seasons. Eleanor's kitchen was a snapshot of another era. Copper pots hung from wrought iron ceiling hooks, their surfaces burnished to a warm glow from years of use. Well-worn cookbooks lined wooden shelves, their spines cracked and pages dog-eared from decades of faithful service. A ceramic rooster perched on the windowsill above the sink, watching over the room with painted eyes that had seen countless meals prepared with love. "Would you like some lemonade?" she asked, already reaching for 2 tall glasses from a cabinet whose doors showed the gentle wear of thousands of openings. "I made it fresh this morning from the lemons in my back garden." Robert always said store-bought lemonade was like kissing through a screen door. You got the idea, but missed the real thing. "That would be nice. Thank you." Daniel's eyes drifted naturally toward the kitchen window, where white curtains framed a view of the backyard. There, beyond Eleanor's carefully tended flower beds, a crooked shed caught his attention. Its weathered boards sagged like tired shoulders, and the door hung at an awkward angle, as if it had given up trying to stand straight long ago. Eleanor followed his gaze, her movements pausing as she poured the lemonade. "Ah, yes. That old thing's been falling apart since Robert passed 2 years ago. He always meant to fix it, but..." Her voice trailed off, heavy with the weight of unfinished plans and promises that would never be kept. Cancer took him before he could get around to half the projects on his list. "I could take a look at it for you," Daniel offered, the words coming as naturally as breathing. His calloused hands already itched to hold tools again, to create order from chaos. "Wouldn't take more than a day or 2 to get it back in shape. Maybe strengthen the foundation while I'm at it." Eleanor's eyes brightened, the same way Emma's did when she discovered a new book at the library. "Would you?" "I'd pay you, of course, whatever your usual rate is." Daniel shook his head firmly, accepting the glass of lemonade with both hands. "No need for payment. It's what neighbors do for each other, what decent folks do." They moved together toward the wraparound porch, their footsteps creating a gentle rhythm on the hardwood floors. Outside, they settled into white wicker chairs that creaked softly under their weight, the kind of comfortable protest that spoke of furniture built to last. The lemonade was perfectly tart, with just enough sweetness to balance the bite, reminding Daniel of lazy summer afternoons spent with Sarah on their own small porch, back when the future stretched ahead of them like an endless ribbon of possibility. The porch could use a fresh coat of paint, too, Eleanor mused, running her weathered hand along the faded railing where white paint peeled like old skin. Robert always said a home needs constant care, just like a marriage. Neglect either one, he'd tell me, and before you know it, the foundation starts to crumble. Daniel nodded slowly, his throat tightening with recognition. Sarah used to say something similar. She'd spend hours in our little garden, her hands deep in the soil, saying plants were like people, they need attention and love to grow strong. Even when she got sick. He paused, watching a cardinal land on the porch railing, its bright red feathers a splash of color against the faded wood. Even then, she'd drag herself outside to water those flowers. Said beauty was worth fighting for, no matter how tired you got. "Tell me about her," Eleanor said softly, her voice carrying the gentle invitation of someone who understood that grief needed witnesses. "If you'd like to, that is." Daniel took a deep breath, surprised by how natural it felt to share these memories with this woman who was still, in many ways, a stranger. But there was something in Eleanor's patient stillness that made words come easier. She was a kindergarten teacher at Riverside Elementary. 23 years in the same classroom, watching generations of children learn to read and write and dream. The kids adored her. She had this way of making everyone feel special, like they were the most important person in the world. He paused, taking a sip of lemonade to steady himself. When she got sick with the leukemia, she kept teaching until the very end. Said those children needed her more than the cancer did. The last day before she couldn't anymore, her whole class made her a card, 26 little handprints in rainbow colors, with messages about how she was their favorite teacher ever. Eleanor's eyes glistened, and she reached over to pat his hand with fingers that trembled slightly, whether from age or emotion. Daniel couldn't tell. She sounds like a woman who understood that love multiplies when you give it away. She never lost her smile, Daniel continued, his voice growing stronger. Even at the end, when the treatment stopped working and we both knew what that meant. Made me promise to keep living, not just existing. Said Emma needed a father who believed in tomorrow, not one who got stuck in yesterday. Eleanor leaned back in her chair, a wistful smile crossing her face. Robert was the same way. 38 years of marriage, and he never complained once, not even during the worst of the cancer treatments. He'd been a Marine, you see, served 2 tours in Vietnam. Said pain was just weakness leaving the body, and weakness was something Marines didn't have time for. She chuckled softly, though tears gathered in the corners of her eyes. Stubborn man, right to the very end. Died holding my hand, telling me stories about the grandchildren we never had. The silence that followed wasn't uncomfortable. It was the kind of quiet that honored shared grief, the understanding that passes between people who've walked similar dark valleys. A gentle breeze stirred the leaves of Eleanor's oak tree, creating a soft whisper that seemed to carry the voices of those they'd loved and lost. "Is that why you started the nonprofit?" Daniel asked eventually, remembering the framed certificate he'd glimpsed in her study during his first visit. "For veterans?" "Yes." Eleanor nodded, her back straightening with renewed purpose. The Veterans Hope Foundation. Robert saw too many of his brothers in arms struggle after coming home, good men who'd served their country with honor, only to find themselves forgotten when the uniforms came off. We started small, working out of our dining room, helping with job placements, housing assistance, counseling for those dealing with things no one should have to carry alone. Her voice grew more animated as she described the foundation's early days, the phone calls at all hours from desperate families, the partnerships they'd built with local businesses, the success stories that made every struggle worthwhile. But, gradually, a shadow crept into her tone. But lately, she sighed, her shoulders dropping like a flag on a windless day. It's been harder to keep it going. Donations are down because people forget quickly, and I'm not as young as I used to be. My arthritis makes it difficult to type the grant applications and the young volunteers. She shook her head. They mean well, but they don't understand what it means to serve something bigger than yourself. Daniel listened intently, watching Eleanor's face transform as she spoke about her life's work. Her passion was evident in every gesture, every carefully chosen word, though weariness crept into her voice like fog rolling in from the sea. Here was a woman who'd spent decades trying to heal wounds that most people pretended didn't exist, and now she was facing the possibility that her efforts might die with her. Standing up, Daniel walked to the porch railing, his carpenter's eye automatically assessing its condition. He tested its stability with gentle pressure, feeling the wood give slightly under his touch. "This needs more than paint," he observed, running his fingers along a section where the wood had begun to rot. "The foundation's still solid, but these support posts are compromised. I can replace the damaged sections while I'm working on the shed, make it strong enough to last another 50 years. "You really don't have to do all that," Eleanor protested, though her voice carried more hope than conviction. "I'm sure you have plenty of your own projects to worry about." "I want to," Daniel interrupted gently, his tone carrying the quiet certainty of a man who'd found purpose in unexpected places. Besides, Emma's spending the day at her friend Madison's house. They're working on some school project about local history. Keeps my hands busy, keeps my mind from wandering too much into places it shouldn't go. Eleanor watched as Daniel examined the railing more closely, his experienced hands identifying problem areas with the thoroughness of a doctor diagnosing a patient. His movements were careful and methodical, the work of someone who understood that shortcuts today meant bigger problems tomorrow. His quiet competence reminded her so much of Robert, the same careful attention to detail, the same unassuming strength that never needed to announce itself. "You know," she said, more to herself than to him, watching Daniel crouch down to inspect the porch's foundation. He's exactly the kind of man the world overlooks and desperately needs. The words hung in the warm afternoon air like a prayer, carried on the gentle breeze that rustled through Eleanor's flower garden. Daniel continued his inspection, unaware of Eleanor's thoughtful gaze following his movements, unaware that she was seeing not just a man willing to fix her porch, but perhaps the answer to prayers she'd been too afraid to voice. The old house creaked and settled around them, its weathered bones telling stories of time and wear, of seasons survived and storms weathered, waiting patiently for caring hands to make it strong again. The polished conference room at Holton Construction buzzed with excitement. Morning sunlight streamed through floor-to-ceiling windows, illuminating the faces of executives gathered around the massive oak table. Mr. Henry Holton stood at the head, his silver hair catching the light as he addressed the board. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm pleased to announce we've secured the Veterans Community Center renovation contract. He paused, allowing the news to sink in. This is a 7-figure project that could put it on the map for charitable developments. Miss Dorsey, who had interviewed Daniel days earlier, straightened her blazer and smiled. The timing couldn't be better. Our quarterly numbers needed this boost. Mr. Holton nodded, spreading architectural plans across the table. The client, Mrs. Eleanor Briggs, has quite a reputation in philanthropic circles. Her late husband was a decorated veteran, and she's determined to honor his legacy with this project. The room fell silent as Mrs. Briggs herself walked in, elegant in a navy blue dress, her silver hair perfectly styled. Mr. Holton rushed to greet her, pulling out a chair. "Mrs. Briggs, we're honored to have you join us." "Thank you, Mr. Holton." She settled into her seat, placing her leather portfolio on the table. "I trust we can discuss my requirements for this project?" "Of course," Mr. Holton replied eagerly. "We've prepared several proposals." Mrs. Briggs raised her hand gently. "Before we review those, I have some non-negotiable conditions." She opened her portfolio, revealing neat handwritten notes. "First, I insist on hiring local laborers. This community center is about giving back to our neighborhood." The executives exchanged glances. Local labor meant higher costs and more complicated scheduling. Mr. Rollins, the project director, cleared his throat. "Mrs. Briggs, while we appreciate the sentiment, managing local crews can be challenging." "Life is challenging, Mr. Rollins." Mrs. Briggs's voice carried quiet authority. "But it's through these challenges that we build character and community." The room grew warm as servers brought in lunch, elegant sandwiches, and fresh fruit that no one touched. Mrs. Briggs continued, "Second, I require ethical labor practices, fair wages, proper safety measures, and respect for every worker." Mr. Holton leaned forward. "I assure you, our company maintains the highest standards. Actions speak louder than words, Mr. Holton." Mrs. Briggs took a sip of water. "Which brings me to my final point, project leadership." The tension in the room shifted. This was usually where clients pushed for their preferred contractors, often leading to complicated negotiations. "We have several highly qualified project managers," Miss Dorsey offered quickly. "I can provide their credentials. That won't be necessary." Mrs. Briggs smiled mysteriously. "I already have someone in mind." The executives perked up, expecting her to name a renowned contractor or industry leader. Mr. Holton pulled out his tablet, ready to research whoever she suggested. "The right person for this job," Mrs. Briggs continued, "is someone who understands both construction and compassion. Someone who sees beyond profit margins to the human impact of our work." The board members nodded encouragingly, still waiting for a name. Mrs. Briggs carefully folded her hands on the table. "I'll provide that information shortly. For now, let's discuss the timeline." The meeting continued for another hour, with Mrs. Briggs reviewing every detail of the project. As the executives filed out, Mr. Holton walked her to her car. "Mrs. Briggs," he said carefully, "we're very interested in your choice for project leadership. Perhaps you could give us a hint?" She patted his arm. "Patience, Mr. Holton. Sometimes the best candidates are right under our noses, even if we've overlooked them before." Later that evening, Daniel sat on the edge of Emma's bed, smoothing her favorite pink blanket. "And then what happened to the princess?" he asked, continuing their nightly story ritual. Emma yawned. She didn't give up, even when nobody believed in her. Daniel smiled, thinking how his daughter's innocent wisdom often hit home. That's right, sweetheart. Sometimes we have to keep believing, even when his phone buzzed on the nightstand. An unknown number. He almost ignored it, but something made him answer. Mr. McCall? A familiar voice, Miss Dorsey from Holton Construction. I apologize for calling so late. Daniel's throat tightened. He stepped into the hallway, closing Emma's door softly behind him. We'd like you to come back in, Miss Dorsey continued. There's been a development regarding your application. Daniel gripped the phone tighter, stunned into silence. After a moment, he managed to find his voice. I don't understand. You said I wasn't qualified. Things have changed, she replied. Could you meet with us tomorrow morning? Through the crack in Emma's door, he could see her already drifting off to sleep, clutching her stuffed rabbit. The same rabbit she'd had since her mother died, when their world had turned upside down. Mr. McCall? Miss Dorsey prompted. Are you there? Daniel took a deep breath, his mind spinning with questions. Yes, he said quietly. Yes, I'm here. Daniel stood in his small kitchen, phone pressed to his ear, as the voice of Sarah Dorsey, the same executive who'd dismissed him weeks ago, stumbled through an explanation. Her usually confident tone now carried an unmistakable note of discomfort. Mr. McCall, we've had an unusual request from our newest client, she said, clearing her throat. Mrs. Eleanor Briggs has specifically asked for you to oversee her Veterans Center renovation project. Daniel's hand tightened around the phone. The morning sunlight streaming through the window suddenly felt too bright, too harsh. Mrs. Briggs? He repeated, though he'd heard perfectly well. Yes, Miss Dorsey continued, her words coming faster now. She was quite insistent. She said she'd seen your work firsthand and wouldn't consider anyone else for the position. Daniel let out a slow breath, watching Emma at the kitchen table as she carefully colored inside the lines of her drawing. The same daughter he'd had to disappoint after that humiliating interview. The memory stung fresh. That's interesting, he said quietly. Considering you didn't want me 2 weeks ago, what was it you said? That I'd been out too long? That you needed someone with current experience? The silence on the other end stretched uncomfortably before Miss Dorsey spoke again. We're prepared to offer you double the original salary we discussed. This is a prestigious project. Mr. McCall and Mrs. Briggs is a very influential client. Daniel walked to the window, running his fingers through his graying hair. So now my experience counts? Now my time away from construction doesn't matter? His voice remained calm, but carried an edge of hurt. I appreciate the offer, Miss Dorsey, but I won't work for people who judge a man's worth by the gaps in his resume rather than the content of his character. Mr. McCall, please. Thank you for calling. He ended the call, setting the phone down carefully despite his urge to throw it. Emma looked up from her coloring book. Was that about a job, Daddy? Yes, sweetie, but not one for us. He kissed the top of her head. Finish your breakfast. We need to make a quick stop before school. 20 minutes later, Daniel's old pickup truck rumbled into Mrs. Briggs's circular driveway. The morning dew still clung to her perfectly manicured roses, and a gentle breeze carried the sweet scent of her flowering jasmine. He found her in her garden, already dressed for the day in a pale blue cardigan, carefully deadheading her prized dahlias. She smiled warmly when she saw him, but something in his expression made her smile fade. Why did you do it? Daniel asked without preamble, his voice tight with emotion. Why force their hand like that? Mrs. Briggs straightened slowly, brushing dirt from her gardening gloves. Would you like some tea, Daniel? No, ma'am. I'd like an answer. She met his gaze steadily, her blue eyes sharp and clear despite her age. Because the best experience is compassion, she said simply, and you have that in spades. This isn't about compassion, Daniel protested. This is about qualifications. About what? Mrs. Briggs interrupted, gently. About pride? The word hit him like a physical blow. He looked away, studying the morning glory vines climbing her garden trellis. When my Harold was alive, Mrs. Briggs continued, removing her gardening gloves. He used to say that true character reveals itself in how we treat others when we have nothing to gain. You stopped to help an old woman in the rain, Daniel. You refused payment. You fixed things around my house, asking nothing in return. That's different, Daniel said quietly. Is it? She stepped closer, her voice soft but firm. The company made a mistake in judging you by what was missing from your resume rather than seeing what was there in front of them. Don't make the same mistake by letting pride blind you to an opportunity to prove them wrong. Daniel's shoulders slumped slightly. I don't need their charity. Charity? Mrs. Briggs laughed, a clear, bright sound. My dear boy, I'm not giving you charity. I'm giving you justice. There's a difference. She patted his arm. Think about it. Not for them, not for me, but for that precious little girl of yours. The drive home was quiet, save for the familiar rattle of his truck's aging engine. Daniel's mind churned with Mrs. Briggs's words, wrestling between his wounded pride and his sense of responsibility. The memory of that failed interview still burned, but so did the image of Emma's face when he'd had to tell her no about the pink bicycle she wanted. At a red light, he glanced in his rearview mirror. Emma sat in the back seat, her small face turned toward the window, watching the world go by with endless curiosity. She caught his eye in the mirror and smiled that same hopeful, trusting smile that reminded him so much of her mother. Daddy? She asked softly. Yes, sweetheart? Was Mrs. Briggs talking about the job people, the ones who made you sad? Daniel's heart clenched. Of course she noticed everything. Yes, baby, she was. Emma was quiet for a moment, then said, maybe they're sorry they were mean. Mama always said everyone deserves a second chance if they're really sorry. The light turned green, but Daniel sat there for a moment longer, letting his daughter's words sink in. A car honked behind him, and he pressed the gas, but his mind was already turning toward possibilities he hadn't allowed himself to consider before. Monday morning arrived with a mix of summer warmth and gentle breeze. Daniel McCall adjusted his steel-toed boots in the parking lot of Holton Construction, watching workers file into the modern glass building. His weathered pickup truck stood out among the shiny vehicles, but he held his head high. The security guard handed him a temporary badge, and Daniel clipped it to his faded blue work shirt. First day? The guard asked kindly. Yes, sir. Project consultant for the Veterans Center renovation. Inside, the office buzzed with Monday morning activity. Daniel made his way to the project management floor, where Miss Dorsey waited with a stack of papers and a tight smile. Mr. McCall, she said, gesturing to a small desk in the corner. Here's your workstation. The team meeting starts in 15 minutes. As Daniel settled in, he couldn't help but notice the sideways glances and whispered conversations. Two project managers huddled by the water cooler, their voices carrying just enough for him to hear. That's the guy Mrs. Briggs insisted on? One muttered, heard he hasn't worked properly in years. Rich old ladies and their charity cases? The other replied with a smirk. Daniel focused on organizing his desk, remembering Emma's words that morning. Show them how special you are, Daddy. He pulled out a small framed photo of her and placed it beside his computer. The morning meeting was held in a glass-walled conference room. Daniel sat quietly, taking detailed notes as the team discussed timelines and budgets. When it came his turn to speak about the Veterans Center requirements, he stood up, straight. Mrs. Briggs wants this center to be more than just a building, he explained, his voice steady. It needs to be accessible, welcoming, and built with respect for those who served. A few veterans from the construction crew nodded in agreement. One of them, a gray-haired carpenter named Mike, caught Daniel's eye and gave him an approving smile. During lunch break, Daniel sat alone at his desk, reviewing blueprints while eating the sandwich Emma had helped pack that morning. Mike approached, pulling up a chair. Those modifications you suggested for the wheelchair ramps? Mike said. Smart thinking. Most folks wouldn't have considered the turning radius issue. My wife's father was in a wheelchair. Daniel replied softly, you learn to notice these things. Throughout the afternoon, Daniel immersed himself in work. He visited the construction site, spoke with contractors, and refined the project timeline. His experience as a former foreman showed in the way he handled questions and solved problems. By day's end, even Miss Dorsey seemed less rigid. Good work today, Mr. McCall, she said, almost reluctantly. The veteran contractors appreciated your attention to detail. As promised, Daniel picked up Emma from after-school care and drove to their favorite ice cream shop, a small, family-owned place called Sweet Dreams. Emma's eyes lit up as she spotted the colorful awning. Can I get 2 scoops today, Daddy? She asked, bouncing in her seat. Sure can, sweetheart. We're celebrating. They sat at a wobbly metal table outside, Emma with her strawberry and chocolate scoops, Daniel with his simple vanilla. The evening sun painted the sky in soft oranges and pinks. Did they like you at the new job? Emma asked, ice cream dripping down her cone. Daniel handed her a napkin. Some did, some might take a while. But that's okay. Good things take time. Like Mommy's garden? Emma said. She always said the prettiest flowers need the most patience. Daniel's throat tightened. That's right, baby, just like Mommy's garden. They finished their ice cream as the streetlights began to flicker on. Back home, after Emma's bath and story time, Daniel knelt beside her small bed with its worn but clean butterfly sheets. Emma clasped her hands together, ready for their nightly prayer. Daniel closed his eyes, feeling the soft carpet under his knees and the weight of the day on his shoulders. "Dear God," he whispered, Emma's small voice echoing his words. "Thank you for new beginnings. Thank you for giving us another chance. And thank you for sending us angels like Mrs. Briggs." Emma added in her own special way, "And please help Daddy's new friends at work see how amazing he is, just like I do." Daniel tucked the blanket around her shoulders, kissed her forehead, and switched on her small nightlight. As he stood in the doorway, watching his daughter drift off to sleep, he felt something he hadn't experienced in a long time: hope. "Good night, sweetheart," he said softly. "Let's thank God for new beginnings." The morning sun cast long shadows across the construction site as Daniel arrived early, clipboard in hand and thermos of coffee steaming in the cool air. He'd spent hours the night before reviewing the safety protocols, hunched over his kitchen table while Emma slept peacefully in the next room. His heart raced as he prepared to present his findings to the team, the pages of his notes slightly crumpled from his nervous grip. The Veterans Center was still mostly blueprint and foundation, concrete poured in neat rectangular sections and steel beams reaching skyward like the bones of some great structure, but already he could see potential hazards that made his stomach clench with worry. Workers began gathering for the morning briefing, their hard hats gleaming in the golden sunlight that filtered through the chain-link fence surrounding the site. The familiar sounds of construction filled the air, the distant rumble of concrete mixers, the rhythmic beeping of trucks backing up, and the cheerful chatter of men who'd worked together for years. Daniel cleared his throat and stepped forward, his work boots crunching on the gravel. "Good morning, everyone. I've noticed some safety concerns we should address before we move forward today." Well. Mr. Rollins's voice cut through the air like a knife slicing through warm butter. He stood at the edge of the group, arms crossed tightly over his pressed white shirt and navy tie, his silver hair perfectly styled despite the construction site setting. His polished shoes looked out of place among the work boots and dust. "Our resident handyman thinks he knows better than certified professionals with years of experience." A few workers snickered, their laughter echoing off the nearby buildings. Daniel felt heat rise in his cheeks, spreading down his neck like spilled coffee, but he kept his voice steady and measured. "The scaffolding on the east side needs additional support brackets, and we should double-check the electrical grounding near the main panel. I noticed some exposed wiring that could be dangerous in wet conditions." Listen to him. Rollins threw his hands up dramatically, his voice dripping with theatrical disdain. "Next, he'll tell us how to hold our hammers properly and which end of a nail to hit." More laughter followed, though some of the older workers shifted uncomfortably and avoided eye contact. Daniel took a deep breath, the morning air filling his lungs and steadying his nerves. "With respect, sir, I've seen accidents happen from overlooking small details. A man can lose fingers, or worse, because someone thought a shortcut was worth the risk. Better safe than sorry." "We have deadlines to meet," Rollins snapped, his face reddening slightly. "Mrs. Briggs expects this project completed on schedule, and we don't have time for amateur suggestions from someone who's been out of the business for years. A young man inspections in Deusada Bakhtadit Talokan." The back raised his hand tentatively, his movement catching everyone's attention. It was Jake Turner, the new intern, fresh out of college, with eager eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses and a notebook always at the ready in his shirt pocket. His hard hat still looked pristine, unmarked by the daily wear that seasoned the equipment of veteran workers. "Actually, sir, I checked the safety guidelines last night on the OSHA website. Mr. McCall's recommendations align perfectly with current standards. In fact, some of his suggestions go beyond the minimum requirements." Rollins glared at Jake with the intensity of a man who'd been publicly contradicted by someone young enough to be his son. The silence stretched uncomfortably, broken only by the distant sound of traffic and the gentle rustle of papers in the morning breeze. But Daniel offered the intern a grateful nod, his eyes warm with appreciation. "Thank you, Jake. I'm just trying to keep everyone safe and make sure we all go home to our families tonight. That's all any of us should want." The workers shifted uncomfortably, their steel-toed boots scraping against the concrete. Several nodded in agreement, their weathered faces showing grudging respect. Daniel continued his presentation, explaining each point clearly and thoroughly, answering questions with the patience of a teacher and the wisdom of someone who'd learned from hard experience. Despite Rollins's continued attempts to undermine him with eye rolls and dismissive gestures, the team began to engage constructively, asking practical questions about implementation and timeline. Throughout the morning, Jake followed Daniel around the site like a devoted apprentice, peppering him with questions while scribbling observations in his ever-present notebook. "How did you know about the scaffolding issue?" he asked, his pen poised above the paper as they walked past the towering metal framework. "Experience," Daniel replied, checking measurements with a well-worn tape measure that had seen countless projects. "Sometimes the worst accidents come from things we take for granted. You look at something every day, and you stop really seeing it. That's when people get hurt." "My dad always said construction was dangerous work," Jake admitted, adjusting his hard hat. "He wanted me to get an office job, something safe and clean." Daniel smiled, remembering his own father's similar concerns years ago. Nothing wrong with safe and clean, but there's satisfaction in building something that'll outlast you. Just gotta be smart about it. By afternoon, crews were already implementing Daniel's suggestions with surprising enthusiasm. Even some of the workers who'd laughed earlier came to him for advice, their initial skepticism replaced by professional curiosity. He helped them adjust safety harnesses with practiced hands and explained proper techniques for working at height, never showing a hint of superiority or condescension. His calm, patient demeanor gradually won over even the most resistant team members. Around 3 o'clock, Mrs. Briggs arrived for her weekly site visit, stepping carefully from her pristine black sedan with the help of her driver. She walked carefully through the construction zone, her elegant silver-headed cane tapping rhythmically against the ground while she navigated the uneven terrain with surprising grace. Her lavender, cardigan, and pearls seemed incongruous among the hard hats and safety vests. Yet she moved through the space with the confidence of someone who belonged. When she saw the improved safety measures, new warning signs, additional support brackets, and properly secured electrical panels, her face lit up with unmistakable pride. "Daniel," she called out, waving him over with a gloved hand, "I can see you're making quite an impact already. The whole atmosphere feels different, more purposeful." He shrugged modestly, wiping his hands on a clean rag. "Just doing what needs to be done, ma'am. Making sure everyone has what they need to do their jobs safely. Sometimes that's exactly what leadership looks like," she said, patting his arm with genuine warmth. "Doing what's right, even when it's not popular or convenient, even when people resist change." Jake, hovering nearby with his notebook, absorbed every word like a student in the presence of wisdom. Mrs. Briggs noticed him and smiled, her eyes twinkling with interest. "And who might this earnest young man be?" "Jake Turner, ma'am," Daniel introduced him, placing a supportive hand on the intern's shoulder. "Our newest team member and a remarkably quick learner. He's been asking all the right questions today." The intern beamed at the praise, his cheeks flushing with pleasure. Mrs. Briggs looked between them thoughtfully, clearly pleased by what she observed. It's wonderful to see knowledge and wisdom being passed on to the next generation. That's how real progress happens, one person teaching another. As she toured the rest of the site with measured steps, examining the foundation work and discussing timeline details with the site supervisor, Jake turned to Daniel with obvious admiration. "She's amazing, isn't she? And you actually know her personally? How did you meet someone like that?" Daniel nodded, watching Mrs. Briggs pause to compliment a worker on his careful attention to detail. "She taught me that kindness matters more than status or position. That how you treat people when nobody important is watching says everything about who you really are. Remember that, Jake. It'll take you further than any degree or certification ever will." The day gradually wound down as the afternoon sun began its descent toward the horizon. Daniel stayed late to finish some paperwork, reviewing daily reports and preparing schedules for tomorrow's work while the site gradually emptied. Workers headed home to families and evening routines, their voices and laughter fading as pickup trucks and cars pulled away from the site. The temporary office trailer, with its flickering fluorescent lights and coffee-stained desk, felt almost peaceful in the growing quiet. He was gathering his things, stuffing papers into his worn leather briefcase, and checking tomorrow's weather forecast on his phone, when voices drifted through the temporary office's thin walls. The conversation was muffled but distinct enough to make him freeze in place. "I don't care what Mrs. Briggs says about him," Rollins's voice carried clearly through the cheap paneling. "The old woman's got a soft spot for charity cases, but this is business. Once this project's done and the check clears, we'll drop him like yesterday's newspaper. He doesn't belong here with real professionals." Daniel's hands froze over his desk, his fingers tightening around his car keys until the metal bit into his palm. The words hit him like a physical blow, settling in his chest with the familiar weight of rejection and disappointment. But he forced himself to breathe steadily, in and out, the way Sarah had taught him during her difficult nights in the hospital. Quietly, moving with deliberate care to avoid making any sound, he collected his keys and walked to his truck. The sunset painting the sky in brilliant shades of orange and purple that seemed to mock his darkening mood. The drive home was silent, no radio, no phone calls, no attempt to fill the empty space with distraction, just the steady hum of his old pickup's engine, the familiar rattle of the loose dashboard panel, and the crushing weight of Rollins's words hanging in the air like storm clouds. The traffic lights blurred slightly as he drove through town, past the diner where he'd shared coffee with Mrs. Briggs, past Emma's school where she'd soon be getting out for the day, past all the ordinary places that suddenly felt tinged with uncertainty. The Saturday morning sky painted gentle streaks of pink across the horizon as Daniel's old pickup truck pulled into the church parking lot. Steam rose from puddles left by last night's rain, creating a misty glow around the stone building. Emma bounced in her seat, clutching the stuffed bear she'd insisted on bringing to cheer people up. "Remember what we talked about, sweetheart?" Daniel asked as he helped her down from the truck. "Be kind and respectful," Emma recited, her pigtails swaying. "And everyone deserves dignity." Daniel smiled, his chest swelling with pride. At 8 years old, his daughter already understood more about compassion than most adults he knew. Inside the church basement, Mrs. Briggs was directing volunteers with gentle authority. The smell of coffee and fresh bread filled the air as people set up long tables and arranged chairs. Her face brightened when she saw them. "Daniel, Emma, thank goodness you're here, Mrs." Briggs called out, walking over to greet them. "We could use some strong hands with the soup kettles." Daniel rolled up his sleeves while Emma carefully tied on an apron that was twice her size. The kitchen buzzed with activity as volunteers chopped vegetables and stirred massive pots of soup. Mrs. Briggs had explained that her nonprofit served meals every Saturday, but today was special. They were also providing information about housing assistance and job training. As the doors opened at 9, people began filtering in. Daniel ladled soup into bowls, noticing how some wouldn't meet his eyes while others stood proud despite their circumstances. A group of veterans sat together, their military bearings still evident in their posture. "The rent's impossible nowadays," one veteran was saying, his coffee cup trembling slightly in his weathered hands, "even with my pension." "Tell me about it," another replied, his arm bearing a Marine Corps tattoo. "Been couch surfing for 3 months now." Daniel's heart ached as he listened. These men had served their country, yet here they were, struggling to find a place to call home. He thought about the veteran center they were building, how much it was really needed. Emma moved between the tables with a pitcher of water, carefully refilling cups. She stopped at an elderly man sitting alone, his clothes clean but worn. He stared at his empty bowl, lost in thought. "Would you like to hold Mr. Snuggles?" Emma asked, holding out her stuffed bear. "He gives really good hugs." The man looked up, startled. His eyes, clouded with sadness moments ago, crinkled at the corners. "Well, I wouldn't want to refuse such a kind offer," he said softly. Emma placed the bear in his hands and watched as he examined it with gentle care. "I had one just like this," he shared, "back when my kids were little." Daniel watched from the serving line as Emma pulled out her lunchbox, the one she'd insisted on bringing, despite his reminders that volunteers could eat after the service. She opened it and took out her sandwich, carefully wrapped in wax paper. "Would you like to share?" she asked the man. "Daddy makes the best peanut butter and jelly sandwiches." The elderly man's eyes welled with tears. "Oh, sweetheart, I couldn't take your lunch." "Please?" Emma pushed the sandwich toward him. "Mr. Snuggles thinks sharing makes food taste better." Other volunteers paused their work, touched by the scene. Mrs. Briggs dabbed at her eyes with a tissue. The man accepted half the sandwich with trembling hands, and Emma sat with him while he ate, chattering about her school art project. As the morning progressed, Daniel found himself drawn into conversations with the veterans. They shared stories of service, loss, and hope. One man had been a carpenter before his deployment, another had worked construction like Daniel. They talked about the challenges of civilian life, of feeling left behind by a world that moved too fast. "You know what's harder than finding a job?" One veteran said, Finding someone who believes you can still do one. Daniel nodded, thinking of his own rejection at Holton Construction. I understand that better than you might think. Near closing time, as volunteers cleaned up and guests slowly departed, Mrs. Briggs found Daniel wiping down tables. "Thank you for coming today," she said, touching his arm gently. "You and Emma brought something special here." Daniel looked across the room where Emma was helping to stack chairs, still chattering with her new elderly friend. "I think I needed this as much as anyone," he admitted. "Sometimes you forget what really matters when you're focused on proving yourself." Mrs. Briggs nodded wisely. "Kindness is its own credential, Daniel. Don't ever forget that." The words settled deep in his heart as he watched Emma wave goodbye to her friend, Mr. Snuggles tucked safely in his daughter's arms again. The autumn morning brought crisp air and golden sunlight to the construction site of the Veterans Center. Daniel McCall stood examining the newly framed walls, his weathered hands trailing along the smooth lumber. 3 weeks of dedication had transformed the skeletal structure into something remarkable. The foundation was solid, the framework precise, and most importantly, his crew worked together like a well-oiled machine. "Looking good, boss," called Jake, the young intern, as he approached with a stack of blueprints. The electrical team just finished the west wing ahead of schedule. Daniel smiled, remembering how different things had been when he first started. The skeptical glances had gradually turned to nods of respect, and the whispers behind his back had become open conversations about project plans. "Great work, Jake. How's the inventory check coming along?" "That's actually why I came to find you," Jake said, spreading the blueprints across a makeshift table. "I noticed something in the numbers that doesn't add up." Daniel leaned in, his eyes scanning the figures. Years of experience kicked in as he spotted the discrepancy immediately. Someone had transposed 2 numbers in the material calculations, resulting in a significant shortfall that would have blown their budget by thousands. "Good catch," Daniel said, pulling out his calculator. He spent the next hour meticulously reviewing every line item, making corrections, and updating the procurement orders. Mrs. Briggs arrived just before lunch, her elegant presence drawing respectful attention from the workers. She wore a navy blazer and carried her signature leather portfolio, looking every bit the distinguished businesswoman she was. "Daniel," she called out warmly, "I need a word with you." They walked together through the site, Mrs. Briggs nodding approvingly at the progress. "The investors' dinner is next Friday," she said. "I want you to present the progress report." Daniel stopped walking. "Me? But Mr. Rollins usually handles those presentations." "And I usually make decisions about my own projects," Mrs. Briggs replied with a gentle firmness. "These men respect you, Daniel. They need to hear from someone who understands both the work and its purpose." Before Daniel could protest further, a commotion drew their attention. Mr. Rollins had arrived, his expensive suit looking out of place among the construction dust. His face darkened when he spotted Daniel with Mrs. Briggs. "Mrs. Briggs," Rollins called out, hurrying over. "I was just coming to discuss the presentation materials for next week's dinner." "Perfect timing, Mrs. Briggs smiled. "I've just informed Daniel that he'll be giving the progress report." Rollins' facade cracked for a moment, revealing a flash of anger before he smoothed it over with a practiced smile. "With all due respect, Mrs. Briggs, these presentations require a certain professional polish. Perhaps we should stick with the usual protocol." "The usual protocol," Mrs. Briggs replied coolly, "is that I make decisions about my investments. Daniel will present." She turned to leave, then added, "Oh, and Daniel caught quite a serious error in the budget calculations. You might want to review those numbers with him." After she left, Rollins stood seething quietly. Daniel tried to ease the tension. "Sir, I can share the corrections I found." "Listen carefully, McCall," Rollins cut him off in a low voice. "You might have Mrs. Briggs fooled, but this is still my company. One presentation won't change that." He turned sharply and strode away, pulling out his phone and speaking urgently to someone. Throughout the afternoon, Daniel noticed Rollins in various corners of the site, speaking in hushed tones with different supervisors. Each conversation ended with furtive glances in Daniel's direction. By evening, Daniel's shoulders felt heavy with the weight of the upcoming presentation. He drove home through the darkening streets, his mind running through all the ways things could go wrong. Emma was waiting at their small kitchen table, homework spread out before her. Her face lit up when she saw him. "Daddy, Mrs. Martinez said I got an A on my science project." Daniel hugged her tight, grateful for the simple joy of his daughter's success. "That's wonderful, sweetheart. Want to help me with something important?" Emma nodded eagerly as Daniel pulled out his notes for the presentation. They cleared space on the kitchen table, and Daniel began practicing his speech. "Good evening, distinguished guests," he started, his voice uncertain. "Stand up straighter, Daddy," Emma coached. "Like when you tell me bedtime stories." Daniel couldn't help but smile. He adjusted his posture and started again, this time with more confidence. "Good evening. 3 months ago, this project was just a dream. Today, I'm proud to show you how that dream is becoming reality." As he continued, Emma watched with rapt attention, occasionally offering suggestions like speak slower or smile more. When he finished, she burst into enthusiastic applause. "That was perfect," she exclaimed. "You're going to do great, Daddy. I just know it." Daniel gathered her in his arms, marveling at how this little girl could make everything seem possible. "Thank you, sweetie. Now, how about we celebrate your A with some hot chocolate?" Emma clapped again, and as Daniel moved to the kitchen to heat the milk, he felt a glimmer of confidence begin to grow. Maybe, just maybe, this presentation would be more than just another hurdle to overcome. Maybe it would be a chance to show everyone what Mrs. Briggs had seen in him all along. The elegant dining room of the Grand Harbor Hotel buzzed with quiet conversation as investors and executives gathered for the Veterans Center Progress Dinner. Crystal chandeliers cast a warm glow over white tablecloths and polished silverware. Daniel McCall tugged at his borrowed tie, feeling out of place among the suits and evening dresses. Mrs. Eleanor Briggs sat at the main table, dignified in her navy dress, occasionally glancing at Daniel with encouraging smiles. Mr. Henry Holton, the company owner, sat beside her, his expression unreadable as he studied the evening's program. When the time came for Daniel's presentation, he rose slowly from his chair. His hands trembled slightly as he made his way to the small podium. The room fell silent, and he could feel the weight of every gaze, some curious, some skeptical, some already dismissive. "Good evening," Daniel began, his voice soft but steady. "Most of you know me as the new project manager for the Veterans Center renovation. But what you might not know is that 3 months ago, I was a man who couldn't even get past a job interview." A few uncomfortable chuckles rippled through the room. Daniel saw Rollins shift in his seat, looking away. "I stand here today not to talk about construction timelines or budget reports, though I promise those are all in order." He smiled gently, earning genuine laughs this time. "Instead, I want to talk about what we're really building at 1247 Pine Street. Daniel pulled out a worn photograph from his jacket pocket. "This is my daughter, Emma, and me, taken 4 years ago when my wife passed away. We were broken then, not just grieving, but lost. Like many of the veterans I've met through Mrs. Briggs's foundation, we needed more than just a roof over our heads. We needed hope." The room grew still. Even the servers paused their movements, caught by the quiet sincerity in Daniel's voice. "At the Veterans Center, we're not just raising walls and installing windows. We're creating a space where broken spirits can heal. Every beam we place is a promise of support. Every door we hang opens to new possibilities. Every window we install lets in the light of hope." Daniel shared stories of the veterans he'd met while working on the site. The former Marine who stopped by daily to watch the progress, finally finding the courage to ask about housing assistance. The elderly Vietnam veteran who brought coffee to the crew just to feel part of something again. The young Afghanistan veteran who now helped with basic carpentry, discovering a new purpose in building rather than destroying. "These men and women gave everything for our country," Daniel continued, his voice growing stronger. "They don't need our pity, they need our respect, our understanding, and most importantly, our action. This center isn't charity, it's an investment in human dignity." He glanced at Mrs. Briggs, whose eyes shone with tears. "Someone very wise recently told me that kindness is its own credential. I've learned that it's also its own foundation. When we build with compassion, we create something stronger than concrete and steel. We create community." Daniel took a deep breath, looking directly at Mr. Holton now. "The project is currently 3 days ahead of schedule and 5% under budget. But our real success won't be measured in dollars or deadlines. It will be measured in the lives transformed within these walls we're raising." As Daniel concluded his presentation, the room erupted in genuine applause. Mr. Holton stood first, followed by the entire audience. Through the crowd, Daniel caught glimpses of different faces, Rollins looking thoughtful, the young intern Jake beaming proudly, and Mrs. Briggs dabbing her eyes with a handkerchief. During the dessert course, various investors approached Daniel, asking questions not about construction, but about the veterans' programs. Mr. Holton himself came over, his usual businesslike demeanor softened. "McCall?" he said, extending his hand. That was unexpected, and exactly what this company needed to hear. Later, as the evening wound down, Mrs. Briggs found Daniel near the coat check. She reached for his hand, her grip surprisingly strong for someone so frail. "You're exactly who I believed you were," she whispered, her eyes bright with pride and something deeper, like recognition of a kindred spirit. Daniel drove home through the quiet streets, his heart feeling lighter than it had in years. The borrowed tie lay on the passenger seat, and his speech notes were crumpled in his pocket, but none of that mattered. For the first time since losing his wife, he felt truly seen, not as a charity case or a widower or a failed professional, but as himself. When he reached their small apartment, he found Emma asleep on the couch, her math homework spread across her lap, and her reading glasses askew. Daniel gently removed the glasses and gathered the papers, smiling at her peaceful face. She had waited up for him, just as she always did. He carried her to bed, tucking her in with the tenderness that came from years of being both mother and father. Emma stirred slightly. "Did you tell them about the angels, Daddy?" she murmured sleepily. "What angels, sweetheart?" "The ones that help you build houses for people who need them," she said, already drifting back to sleep. Daniel stood in her doorway, watching his daughter sleep, his heart so full it almost hurt. The moonlight streaming through her window cast a soft glow on her face, reminding him of her mother. For the first time in years, that memory brought more comfort than pain. The late afternoon sun painted long shadows across the Veterans Center construction site. Daniel McCall's old pickup truck rumbled to a stop in front of the nearly completed building, its red brick facade warm and welcoming in the golden light. 8-year-old Emma bounced in her seat, pigtails swaying with excitement. "Can I really go inside today, Daddy?" she asked, pressing her small hands against the window. Daniel smiled, his heart swelling with pride. "Sure can, sweetheart, but remember what I told you. Stay close and be careful." Emma finished, already reaching for her seatbelt. They stepped out into the mild evening air. The site was still active, with workers finishing up their day's tasks. The sound of hammering echoed from somewhere inside, mixed with good-natured chatter and classic rock playing from a distant radio. "Mr. McCall!" Jake, the young intern, jogged over with a bright yellow hard hat in his hands. "Look what we got for the site mascot." He knelt down to Emma's level and presented her with a child-sized hard hat, complete with her name written across the front in careful black letters. Emma's eyes widened as she accepted the gift. "It's just like Daddy's." She immediately put it on, beaming up at them both. "The guys all pitched in," Jake explained, straightening up. "We figured since you're here so much with your dad after school, you should have proper gear too." Daniel's throat tightened with emotion. Just 2 months ago, these same workers had viewed him with suspicion and doubt. Now, this simple gesture spoke volumes about how far they'd come. "Thank you, Jake. That means a lot." Daniel managed, placing a hand on Emma's shoulder. They walked through the main entrance, where fresh paint gleamed on the walls. The reception area was taking shape, with newly installed windows letting in streams of natural light. Emma's footsteps echoed on the polished concrete floor as she explored, her new hard hat slightly too big and wobbling with each step. "Look, Daddy, it's so big!" Her voice carried through the space. Workers paused their tasks to wave at Emma, calling out friendly greetings. Many had come to know her from the afternoon she spent doing homework in Daniel's side office while waiting for Mrs. Briggs to pick her up for their now regular garden club meetings. Daniel led Emma down the main hallway, pointing out different features. "See those windows? They're special ones that let in lots of light but keep the heat out. And over there, that's going to be a computer room where veterans can learn new job skills." They reached the community room, the heart of the building. High ceilings stretched above them, and the late sun streamed through tall windows, creating patterns on the floor. The space would soon host support group meetings, family gatherings, and celebrations. "This is my favorite part," Daniel said softly. He guided Emma to a wall where workers were installing a mural. The design showed a sunrise over mountains, with silhouettes of service members helping each other climb upward. Below it, carved in stone, were the words, "Hope rises together." Emma studied the mural intently. Is this why you always say God has a plan, even when bad things happen? Daniel knelt beside her, surprised by her insight. Yeah, sweetheart. Sometimes when one door closes, it's because there's a better one waiting to open. Remember when I didn't get that first job here? She nodded solemnly. You were really sad. I was, but if I had gotten that job, I wouldn't have stopped to help Mrs. Briggs that day. And then all of this, he gestured around them, might never have happened. A familiar voice called from behind them. Testing the acoustics, are we? Tom Martinez, the site foreman, approached with a clipboard. Looking good in that hard hat, Miss Emma. Emma straightened proudly. Thank you. I'm going to wear it every time I visit. The grand opening's all set for Saturday, Tom reported, handing Daniel some papers. Mrs. Briggs approved the final details this morning. You've done something special here, Daniel. Not just with the building. Daniel glanced around at the workers, now his friends, who moved with purpose and pride in their work. He thought about the veterans who would soon find hope within these walls, about Mrs. Briggs's unwavering faith in him, and about Emma's growing understanding of perseverance. They walked outside as the sun began to set, casting the building in a warm glow. Emma skipped ahead to examine a newly planted flower bed, her hard hat bobbing with each step. Daniel stood still for a moment, taking in the sight of his daughter playing happily in front of the almost finished center. He remembered the crushing disappointment of that first rejected interview, the rain-soaked day helping Mrs. Briggs, and all the small moments that had led to this transformation. Looking up at the deepening sky, he whispered quietly, "Thank you, Lord, for this second chance." The sound of Emma's laughter mixed with the evening breeze, and Daniel felt a deep sense of peace settle over him. The center stood as a testament not just to second chances, but to the power of faith, kindness, and perseverance. The morning sun climbed high over the Veterans Center as crowds began to gather. Red, white, and blue bunting draped the freshly painted walls, and American flags rippled in the gentle breeze. Folding chairs lined the parking lot in neat rows, already filling with townspeople dressed in their Sunday best. Daniel McCall adjusted his tie for the 10th time, watching from behind the temporary stage. His hands trembled slightly as he reviewed his notes. Emma, wearing her prettiest yellow dress, sat in the front row next to Jake, the young intern who had become like family over the past months. Mrs. Eleanor Briggs stood near the podium, radiant in a powder blue suit. Her silver hair caught the sunlight like a crown. She greeted each arrival with the grace of a queen, but her eyes kept finding Daniel, twinkling with quiet pride. A local high school band played patriotic tunes, while veterans in crisp uniforms helped elderly guests to their seats. The atmosphere buzzed with joy and anticipation. Even Mr. Rollins and the other Holton construction executives seemed caught up in the spirit of the day. Their usual stern expressions softened. "Are you ready?" Mrs. Briggs touched Daniel's arm gently. "You look wonderful, my dear." Daniel smiled, though his stomach churned. "I'm not much for public speaking." "Nonsense. Just speak from your heart, as you always do." She patted his hand. "God didn't bring you here by accident." The mayor stepped up to the microphone first, making brief remarks about community and progress. Daniel barely heard the words. He was lost in thought, remembering that rainy day when he'd first met Mrs. Briggs on the roadside. How different his life had been then, how close he'd been to giving up. Finally, Mrs. Briggs took the podium. Her voice rang clear and strong across the crowd. "Dreams don't always arrive in the packages we expect," she began. "Sometimes they come disguised as flat tires and closed doors." A knowing chuckle rippled through the audience. She spoke about her late husband's vision for supporting veterans, about second chances and divine timing. Then she turned, extending her hand toward Daniel. "And now, I'd like to introduce someone very special, a man who embodies everything this center stands for, Mr. Daniel McCall." The applause was warm as Daniel approached the microphone. He cleared his throat, looking out at the sea of faces. Emma gave him a thumbs up, and his racing heart steadied. "6 months ago," he began, his voice growing stronger with each word, "I stood in an interview room being told I had nothing to offer, that my years of caring for my dying wife and raising our daughter had made me irrelevant." He paused, emotion thick in his throat. "But God had other plans. And he sent an angel named Eleanor Briggs to remind me that our worth isn't measured by a resume." Mrs. Briggs dabbed at her eyes with a handkerchief as Daniel continued. The crowd leaned forward, caught up in his story of redemption and hope. He spoke about the veterans he'd met, about Emma's lessons in kindness, about the power of believing in people when the world has forgotten them. This center, he gestured to the building behind him, isn't just brick and mortar. It's proof that second chances are real, that faith and perseverance still matter, that sometimes our greatest setbacks lead us exactly where we're meant to be. Applause erupted. Mrs. Briggs stepped forward to stand beside him, beaming with joy. But as the clapping reached its peak, something changed in her expression. Her face went ashen, and her hand flew to her chest. "Eleanor?" Daniel reached for her just as her knees buckled. The applause turned to gasps. Mrs. Briggs collapsed against him, her breathing shallow and labored. Daniel lowered her gently to the ground, cradling her head. "Someone call an ambulance," he shouted. The crowd erupted in chaos. Emma tried to run forward, but Jake held her back, covering her eyes. "Stay with me, Eleanor," Daniel pleaded, clutching her cold hand. Her lips moved, but no sound came out. Somewhere in the distance, sirens wailed. The next hours passed in a blur of emergency rooms and beeping monitors. Daniel sat beside Mrs. Briggs's hospital bed, holding her fragile hand, while Emma dozed in a chair nearby. The sunset painted the sterile room in shades of orange and pink. Mrs. Briggs's eyes fluttered open. Her voice was barely a whisper. "Daniel, I'm here." He leaned closer. With trembling fingers, she pressed an envelope into his palm. "You were meant to finish what I began." Her grip tightened briefly, then went slack. The heart monitor's steady beep turned into a single, piercing tone. Daniel's world stopped as nurses rushed in, pushing him aside. Emma woke with a start, tears already streaming down her face as if she somehow knew. Through the chaos, Daniel stared at the envelope in his hand, Mrs. Briggs's final words echoing in his ears. Outside the window, the last rays of sunset faded to darkness, marking the end of a day that had begun with such promise and joy. The flat tone of the monitor filled the room, drowning out everything else except the sound of Emma's quiet sobs. The morning light crept through Daniel McCall's kitchen window, casting long shadows across the worn linoleum floor. His coffee sat untouched, growing cold in the chipped mug Emma had painted for him last Father's Day. The white envelope from Mrs. Briggs lay on the table, its corners slightly bent from being clutched so tightly in his hands at the hospital. Daniel stared at his name, written in Mrs. Briggs's elegant handwriting, unable to bring himself to break the seal. The events of yesterday played over and over in his mind. The pride in her eyes during his speech, her sudden collapse, the final whispered words that echoed in his heart. The kitchen clock ticked loudly in the heavy silence. Emma's soft footsteps padded down the hallway. She appeared in her pink pajamas, her brown hair tousled from sleep, her eyes, still puffy from crying last night, fixed on the envelope. "Daddy?" she said quietly, moving closer to where he sat. "Mrs. Briggs wanted you to read it. She told me so last week." Daniel looked up, surprised. "She talked to you about this?" Emma nodded, climbing onto the chair next to him. "She said she had a special letter for you, but it was a secret." She touched the envelope's edge with gentle fingers. "She said it was full of hope, like the garden we were planning." Daniel's throat tightened. He remembered how Mrs. Briggs and Emma had spent hours discussing their plans to create a memorial garden behind the Veterans Center, drawing pictures of where each flower should go. "I miss her already," Emma whispered, leaning against his arm. Daniel wrapped an arm around his daughter's shoulders, drawing strength from her presence. With his free hand, he finally picked up the envelope. The paper made a soft tearing sound as he opened it, his fingers trembling slightly. Inside was a letter, several pages long, and another smaller envelope. He unfolded the pages, recognizing Mrs. Briggs's distinctive penmanship. "My dear Daniel, if you're reading this, then God has called me home. Please don't mourn too deeply. I've lived a full life, blessed beyond measure, especially in these last months, knowing you and precious Emma. When you stopped to help me that rainy day, I saw something rare, a man of true character whose worth couldn't be measured by a resume or bank account. You reminded me so much of my Robert, the same quiet strength, the same unfailing kindness. I need to confess something. I didn't just happen to choose Holton Construction for the Veterans Center. I investigated them after they rejected you, and I made sure they won the bid precisely because I wanted to teach them and you an important lesson about worth and second chances. You see, Daniel, I was once like them. After Robert died, I became bitter, judging people by their status rather than their hearts. But God humbled me through my own failures, teaching me that true wealth lies in character, not credentials. I'm leaving you more than just this letter. The second envelope contains legal documents naming you as the new director of the Robert Briggs Veterans Foundation. The board has already approved this decision. The foundation's resources, including a modest endowment, will allow you to draw a fair salary while continuing our work full-time. This isn't charity, Daniel. It's investment in character. You understand what our veterans need because you share their values: honor, sacrifice, and unwavering faith despite life's hardships. More importantly, you see people as God sees them, not by their past failures, but by their present worth and future potential. The Veterans Center is just the beginning. I've left plans for expansion, including that garden Emma so beautifully designed. But how you proceed is up to you now. Trust your instincts, Daniel. They've never failed you. Take care of our veterans. Take care of yourself and Emma. And remember, God's no is often just a yes waiting to bloom. With love and faith, Eleanor Briggs. Daniel's vision blurred as tears spilled onto the paper. Emma wrapped her small arms around his neck, and he pulled her close, his shoulders shaking with quiet sobs. "It's okay, Daddy," she whispered, patting his back just as he had done for her countless times. "Mrs. Briggs is with Mommy now. They're both watching over us." Through his tears, Daniel gazed out the kitchen window at the morning sun, illuminating the half-finished garden behind the Veterans Center. The foundation sign caught the light, its fresh paint gleaming with promise. "I'll finish it, Eleanor," he whispered, holding Emma close. "I promise." The morning light seemed to brighten, as if in response to his words, casting a warm glow across the garden's empty beds, waiting to be filled with new life, new purpose, and the perennial blooms of hope. The autumn breeze rustled through the maple trees, scattering golden leaves across the church lawn. Daniel McCall stood at the podium, his dark suit pressed and neat, facing the crowd gathered for Eleanor Briggs's memorial service. The small chapel overflowed with people whose lives she had touched. Veterans in their uniforms, local business owners, and families from the community. Sunlight filtered through stained glass windows, casting rainbow patterns across the wooden pews. Emma sat in the front row, wearing the blue dress Mrs. Briggs had given her, clutching a white rose. Her small face was solemn but peaceful, reminding Daniel of how his daughter had handled loss before, with a wisdom beyond her years. "Eleanor Briggs," Daniel began, his voice steady despite the ache in his heart, saw what others missed. She looked past appearances, past circumstances, past failure, and found the gold in people's hearts. He paused, drawing a deep breath. 3 months ago, I was a man with a broken resume and a wounded spirit. But Eleanor, she saw a father trying his best. She saw potential where others saw risk. The faces before him nodded in understanding. Many of them had similar stories, moments when Eleanor had believed in them when no one else would. She taught me that faith isn't just about believing in God. Daniel continued, gripping the edges of the podium. It's about believing in his ability to work through ordinary people. Eleanor never wanted recognition. She wanted results. Lives changed, hope restored, dignity returned. In the third row, Mr. Holton sat with his head bowed, his usual businesslike demeanor softened by genuine grief. Daniel noticed how the company owner's shoulders hunched slightly, as if carrying a weight of realization. Eleanor's greatest gift wasn't her money or her influence. Daniel's voice grew warmer. It was her ability to see the best in people before they could see it in themselves. She believed in second chances because she understood that sometimes our greatest failures lead to our most important missions. The veterans in attendance sat straighter, many wiping their eyes. They knew firsthand how Eleanor had transformed their struggles into stepping stones. She used to tell me, "Daniel, when God closes a door, He's not punishing you. He's protecting you until the right door opens." Daniel smiled through his tears. Eleanor was that open door for so many of us. And now, it's our turn to keep that door open for others. After the eulogy, people filed forward to place flowers near Eleanor's photograph, a recent one where she stood smiling in front of the Veterans Center, her eyes bright with purpose. The image captured her essence perfectly, elegant, determined, and full of grace. Mr. Holton approached Daniel during the reception, his usual confidence tempered by humility. "McCall," he said quietly, extending his hand, "I've been doing a lot of thinking since Eleanor." He cleared his throat. "The company wants to continue supporting the nonprofit, full backing, whatever you need." Daniel studied the man's face, seeing genuine remorse mixed with determination. "This isn't about business anymore, is it, sir?" No, Holton admitted, glancing around at the gathering. Eleanor showed me what real leadership looks like. It's not about profit margins or risk assessment. It's about seeing potential and having the courage to invest in it. They stood in comfortable silence, watching as Emma helped serve coffee to elderly veterans, her small face serious with responsibility. Daniel thought about how Eleanor would have loved seeing this. People from different worlds coming together, walls of prejudice crumbling. "I'd be honored to accept your support, Mr. Holton," Daniel finally said. "But on one condition, we do this Eleanor's way. Every person gets a fair chance, regardless of their past." Holton nodded, understanding the deeper meaning. "Agreed. And Daniel?" He paused. "I'm sorry about how we treated you before. Eleanor was right about you." The afternoon sun began to fade, casting long shadows across the church garden where Eleanor had spent so many hours tending roses. People were starting to leave, carrying with them memories of a woman who had changed their lives through simple acts of faith. Daniel stood by the chapel steps, thanking people for coming, sharing quiet moments with those who needed to tell their own Eleanor stories. Each tale reinforced the magnitude of her impact, the quiet ways she had woven hope into the fabric of their community. Emma finished helping with the cleanup and made her way to her father's side. Her small hand slipped into his, warm and reassuring. Looking up at the golden sky, she squeezed his fingers gently. "She's watching from heaven, Daddy." The morning sunlight streamed through the windows of Daniel's new office at the Veterans Center. 3 weeks had passed since Eleanor's memorial, and the desk before him, her old desk, still held traces of her presence. A silver letter opener, a small crystal cross, and a framed photo of her husband in uniform. Daniel ran his fingers along the smooth mahogany surface, remembering her words. "You were meant to finish what I began." He pulled out a fresh notepad and began sketching plans for new programs. The Veterans Center had good bones, but Eleanor's vision had always been bigger than just a building. She'd wanted a place where broken spirits could heal, where second chances weren't just dreams, but daily realities. The door creaked open, and Jake Turner poked his head in. The young intern had traded his construction hat for business-casual attire, though his enthusiastic energy remained unchanged. "Morning, Mr. McCall. I've got those employment statistics you asked for." Daniel gestured to the chair across from him. "Thanks, Jake. And please, it's just Daniel." He accepted the folder, noting Jake's careful organization, a skill that had made him invaluable these past weeks. As they reviewed the numbers, Daniel's heart grew heavy. Too many veterans struggling to find work, too many single parents choosing between childcare and job training. The problem seemed overwhelming, but Eleanor had taught him that every solution started with one simple step. "What if?" Daniel said, tapping his pen against the desk. "We converted the East Wing into a training center, computer labs, interview prep rooms, childcare space, while parents attend workshops." Jake's eyes lit up. "I could help set up the digital infrastructure. My college roommate works in IT. He'd probably volunteer his time." Daniel smiled, remembering how Eleanor had always said connections were God's way of weaving communities together. "Make the call." Over the next few days, the center hummed with new energy. Daniel worked late into the evenings, coordinating with local businesses for job placement programs. He arranged partnerships with daycare centers, negotiating reduced rates for single parents, attending career training. Each small victory felt like a tribute to Eleanor's memory. One Tuesday morning, Emma arrived after school, her backpack full of flower seeds. "Daddy, can we plant these in the courtyard?" "Mrs. Briggs always said gardens make sad hearts happy." Daniel paused his paperwork, struck by his daughter's simple wisdom. "That's a wonderful idea, sweetheart." They spent the afternoon digging in the rich soil of the courtyard. Other volunteers joined them, veterans who knew their way around landscaping, mothers whose children played nearby, Jake with his sleeve rolled up despite his office clothes. Someone brought lemonade. Another person arrived with more plants from their home garden. "What should we call it?" Emma asked, patting soil around a young rose bush. "Mrs. Briggs' garden." Several voices answered at once. Daniel felt tears prick his eyes as he watched the community Eleanor had dreamed of taking shape before him. The programs grew steadily. Jake proved himself invaluable, modernizing their systems and creating a user-friendly website where veterans could access resources. He had a natural talent for connecting with younger veterans, understanding their struggles to transition back to civilian life. "You know," Jake said one afternoon as they reviewed applications for their job training program, "I used to think success meant a corner office and a fancy title. Mrs. Briggs, and you showed me it's about the lives you touch. Daniel nodded, thinking of his own journey. Eleanor had a way of helping people find their true purpose. The courtyard garden flourished as summer approached. Emma spent hours there after school, teaching other children how to tend the flowers. Veterans would sit on the benches, finding peace among the blooming plants. Single parents would meet there, sharing stories and support while their children played. One evening, as the sun painted the sky in shades of pink and gold, Daniel stood before the completed building. The sign above the entrance read, Eleanor Briggs Veterans Center, with smaller letters beneath, Where Hope Grows. The courtyard garden burst with color, roses, daisies, and marigolds dancing in the evening breeze. Through the windows, he could see people moving about their evening activities, a computer class in session, a support group sharing coffee, children doing homework while their parents attended job training. The center had become exactly what Eleanor had envisioned, not just a building, but a beating heart of hope in the community. Daniel closed his eyes, feeling the warm breeze on his face. For the first time since losing his wife, since all those doors had closed in his face, since Eleanor's passing, he felt completely at peace. He understood now that this had been God's plan all along, not just for the sinner, but for him. Every rejection, every setback had led him here, to continue Eleanor's legacy of love and second chances. The garden's sweet fragrance filled the air as the day's last light painted the building in warm hues. Daniel stood there, grateful for the journey that had brought him to this moment, this purpose, this peace. The morning sun cast long shadows through Daniel's office window as his phone buzzed. The caller ID displayed Holton Construction. His thumb hesitated over the screen for a moment before answering. Daniel McCall speaking. Mr. McCall, came the crisp voice of Miss Dorsey, the same executive who dismissed him months ago. I hope I'm not catching you at a bad time. The board would like to discuss an opportunity with you. Daniel leaned back in his chair, glancing at Eleanor's photo on his desk. I'm listening. We've been impressed with your work on the Veterans Center project. Mr. Holton himself has authorized me to offer you the position of Senior Project Manager. Full benefits, company car, and double your current salary. She paused, then added, We'd like to make things right. Through the window, Daniel watched a group of veterans tending to Emma's garden. One man, who'd arrived 3 weeks ago, unable to meet anyone's eyes, was now showing a newcomer how to prune roses. The sight warmed his heart. I appreciate the offer, Miss Dorsey. Truly, but I've found my calling here. Mr. McCall, Daniel, please consider this carefully. This is a rare opportunity. I'm considering it carefully, he said, his voice gentle but firm. The work we're doing here, it's not just about buildings anymore. We're helping people rebuild their lives. A veteran's young son ran past his window, chasing a butterfly through the garden. The boy's father, who'd found work through their job placement program last week, watched from a bench with a peaceful smile. I understand your commitment to charity, Miss Dorsey pressed, but surely you could do more good with the resources our position would provide? Daniel stood, walking to the window. You know, someone very wise once told me that the best experience is compassion. She was right. The people here don't need another construction manager. They need someone who understands their struggles, who's walked through dark valleys and found light on the other side. After a moment of silence, Miss Dorsey's tone softened. You've changed, Mr. McCall. No, he smiled. I've just finally become who I was meant to be. The conversation ended amicably, and Daniel returned to reviewing applications for their new job training program. An hour later, his assistant knocked on the door. Mr. McCall, Mr. Holton is here to see you. Daniel looked up, surprised. Henry Holton stood in the doorway, his usual power suit replaced by a casual blazer. The company owner's expression was thoughtful as he took in the modest office. May I come in? Holton asked. Of course. Daniel gestured to a chair. What brings you here? Holton settled into the seat, his eyes landing on Eleanor's photo. I heard you turned down our offer. News travels fast. In our business, it does. Holton leaned forward. I came to understand why, and perhaps to make a different kind of offer. Daniel waited, noting how the usually imposing businessman seemed almost humble. We have surplus materials from our latest project, Holton continued. High-grade stuff, lumber, drywall, fixtures. Rather than warehouse it, I thought perhaps your programs could put it to better use. That's very generous. It's practical, Holton said, but his eyes softened. Eleanor Briggs taught me something through you, McCall. Success isn't just about profit margins. It's about the lives we touch along the way. Daniel thought of Eleanor's letter, still kept in his desk drawer. She had a way of teaching without preaching. Indeed. Holton stood, moving to the window. Below, veterans and volunteers worked together in the garden, their laughter floating up. You've created something special here. We all have, Daniel corrected. Every person who walks through those doors adds something valuable. Holton turned, extending his hand. Let's make it official then. Holton Construction would like to become a regular donor to your programs. Materials, expertise, whatever you need. Daniel stood and grasped the offered hand. The handshake felt different from their first meeting. No power plays, no judgment, just mutual respect between two men who'd found common ground. Thank you, Daniel said simply. No, Holton replied. Thank you for showing us a better way. After Holton left, Daniel walked through the center's halls, greeting people by name, listening to their stories. He found Emma in the garden, teaching younger children how to plant sunflower seeds. Daddy, she called, her hands dirty, but her smile bright. Mr. Jake says we're getting new supplies to build more rooms. Daniel knelt beside her, helping to pat soil around a tiny seedling. That's right, sweetheart. Remember the company that didn't hire me before? Emma nodded, her face scrunching at the memory. Well, they offered me a job again today. A big job. Did you take it? She asked, though her knowing smile suggested she already had the answer. No, Daniel said, watching the sunlight dance through the leaves of Eleanor's memorial garden. Sometimes winning means walking away from what once hurt you. Emma leaned against him, her small hand finding his. Together, they watched as more volunteers arrived, carrying garden tools and hope in equal measure. The center hummed with activity, a living testament to Eleanor's vision and the power of second chances. The autumn breeze rustled through the newly planted maple trees outside the Veterans Center, their leaves a tapestry of gold and crimson. Inside the main hall, Daniel adjusted his tie as he watched volunteers set up round tables draped in cream-colored linens. Crystal centerpieces caught the late afternoon light, sending tiny rainbows dancing across the walls. Is this straight, Daddy? Emma called from her stepladder, carefully hanging a banner that read, First Annual Eleanor Briggs Memorial Fundraiser. Daniel smiled, steadying the ladder. Perfect, sweetheart. Just like Mrs. Briggs would have wanted it. The hall had transformed since those early construction days, where there had once been bare concrete and exposed beams. Warm wooden floors now gleamed. Photos of veterans and their families lined the walls, telling stories of lives rebuilt. And in the center, above the podium, hung a portrait of Eleanor Briggs, her kind, eyes seeming to watch over everything with quiet approval. As evening approached, guests began arriving. Veterans in press uniforms mingled with local business owners and families who'd found hope within these walls. Jake, now the center's full-time program coordinator, greeted people at the door, his confidence a far cry from the uncertain intern he'd once been. Mr. McCall, a young mother, called out, waving as she entered with her two children. The job training program changed our lives. We just got our own apartment. Daniel squeezed her shoulder warmly. That's exactly what Mrs. Briggs dreamed of. The dinner service began promptly at 6. The catering had been donated by local restaurants, many of whom had known Eleanor personally. The smell of roasted chicken and fresh bread filled the air as servers, all volunteers from the community, moved efficiently between tables. At the podium, Daniel cleared his throat. Welcome, everyone. Tonight, we honor a woman who saw beyond surfaces to the heart of people. His voice caught slightly. Eleanor Briggs taught me that second chances aren't just about getting another opportunity, they're about creating opportunities for others. He shared stories of the center's first year, the job placement program that had helped 30 veterans find work, the support group for grieving spouses that had become a tight-knit family, the children's tutoring program that Emma had inspired. And now, Daniel said, smiling toward his daughter, someone very special would like to share a few words. Emma approached the microphone, her Mary Jane shoes clicking against the wooden steps. She wore her best blue dress, her dark hair pulled back with the butterfly clip Mrs. Briggs had given her. In her hands, she clutched a piece of paper covered in careful handwriting. The room fell silent as she began to read. Dear Mrs. Briggs, I learned in school that angels have wings, but I think some angels wear normal clothes and drive cars. They get flat tires. That's how you found us, because you needed help, but really, you were helping us all along. You told me once that kind people can change the world. I didn't understand then, but I do now. I see it when Daddy helps someone find a job, or when the veterans smile at dinner, or when Miss Sarah finally stopped crying at the grief group and started laughing again. You changed our world first. You believed in Daddy when other people didn't. You showed us that sometimes the best houses aren't built with hammers. They're built with love and second chances. I plant flowers in your garden every Saturday. Daddy says they're like your kindness. They keep growing and making everything more beautiful. I hope you can see them from heaven. Thank you for being our angel. Love, Emma. By the time she finished, there wasn't a dry eye in the room. The silence held for a moment before erupting into applause. Emma curtsied slightly, just as Mrs. Briggs had once taught her, before running back to Daniel's waiting arms. Mr. Holton stood up from his table, dabbing his eyes. I'd like to announce that Holton Construction will match all donations tonight, dollar for dollar. Other business owners quickly followed suit with their own pledges. As the evening continued, people lined up to share their stories and contribute. A veteran handed over his first paycheck from his new job. A widow donated her wedding ring, saying Eleanor had helped her find strength to move forward. Children emptied piggy banks into the donation box. The final total exceeded anything Daniel had imagined possible. But more than the money, it was the spirit in the room, the tangible sense of community and purpose that would have made Eleanor proudest. As the guests began to leave, each stopping to hug Emma or shake Daniel's hand, the sunset painted the sky in brilliant pinks and purples. Daniel stood before Eleanor's portrait, its placement catching the last rays of light. "We did it, Eleanor," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. Her painted eyes seemed to twinkle with that familiar warmth, that unwavering faith in the goodness of people and the power of second chances. The morning sun painted long shadows across the cemetery's dewy grass as Daniel and Emma made their way between the quiet rows of headstones. Emma clutched a bouquet of yellow daffodils, Mrs. Briggs's favorite flowers, ever three, while Daniel carried a small basket filled with gardening supplies. They found her grave nestled beneath a mature maple tree. The polished granite headstone read, Eleanor Marie Briggs, beloved wife, friend, and guardian angel. Daniel knelt down and began clearing away fallen leaves, his movements gentle and purposeful. "The grass is getting a little long," he murmured, pulling out small garden shears from the basket. Emma watched as he carefully trimmed around the edges of the headstone, making everything neat and tidy, just the way Mrs. Briggs had always kept her own garden. "Can I put the flowers now, Daddy?" Emma asked softly, holding the bright blooms close to her chest. Daniel nodded, sitting back on his heels. "Go ahead, sweetheart." Emma stepped forward and arranged the daffodils in the bronze vase embedded in the stone. Her small fingers adjusted each stem with careful consideration until the arrangement looked perfect. She stepped back, satisfied with her work. Daniel reached out and traced Mrs. Briggs's name with his fingertips. "Well, Eleanor," he said, his voice warm despite the morning chill, "I thought you might like an update on how things are going at the center." Emma settled cross-legged beside him on the grass. Her pink dress spread around her like flower petals. She knew this ritual well. Every month they came here, and her father would talk to Mrs. Briggs as if she were sitting right there with them. "The Veterans Program has really taken off," Daniel continued. "Remember Jake, the young intern? He's heading up our job placement initiative now. Last week, we helped 5 more veterans find steady work." He smiled, remembering the joy on their faces. "And that single-parent support group you always wanted? We've got 30 families involved now. They meet every Tuesday night while we provide childcare." A gentle breeze stirred the daffodils, making them dance in the morning light. Daniel's eyes grew misty as he continued. "The garden courtyard is beautiful. You should see it. Emma here has become quite the little gardener. She's got your touch with the roses." Emma beamed with pride. "I water them every day, Mrs. Briggs," she chimed in. "And I talk to them too, just like you taught me." Daniel wrapped an arm around his daughter's shoulders. "The community center is always full now. We've got art classes for kids, computer training for seniors, and that cooking program you suggested. It's become so popular we had to start a waiting list." He paused, swallowing past the lump in his throat. "Sometimes I still can't believe how everything turned out. That flat tire that day, it wasn't just a coincidence, was it? You saw something in me that I couldn't see in myself anymore." Emma reached into her little backpack and pulled out her beloved stuffed angel, the one Mrs. Briggs had given her during one of their tea parties. The small white plush toy was well loved, its wings slightly crooked from countless hugs. "Daddy," she said solemnly, "I want to leave Angel here with Mrs. Briggs." She placed the stuffed toy carefully at the base of the headstone, "so she won't be lonely." Daniel felt tears welling up in his eyes. "Are you sure, sweetheart? You love that angel?" Emma nodded firmly. "Mrs. Briggs gave her to me when I was sad. Now she can keep her company." She patted the toy's head gently. "And anyway, Daddy, we're her angels now, aren't we? Helping people just like she did?" Daniel pulled Emma close, his heart overflowing with love and gratitude. "Yes, baby. Yes, we are." He looked at the headstone through tear-filled eyes. "Thank you, Eleanor, for everything. For seeing past my failures to what could be. For giving me back my purpose. For showing Emma and me that sometimes the biggest blessings come disguised as setbacks." The morning sun had risen higher now, warming their backs as they sat in comfortable silence. A butterfly, bright yellow like the daffodils, fluttered past and landed briefly on Mrs. Briggs's headstone before dancing away on the breeze. "Time to go, sweetheart," Daniel said finally, gathering their gardening supplies. He stood and helped Emma to her feet, brushing grass from her dress. Emma blew a kiss toward the grave. "Bye, Mrs. Briggs. We'll come back soon." Daniel took his daughter's small hand in his, feeling its warmth and trust. Together they walked back along the winding path, their shadows stretching out behind them in the morning sunlight. The dew had dried now, and the grass sparkled like diamonds under the clear blue sky. As they made their way through the peaceful cemetery, Daniel felt a profound sense of peace settle over him. Each step took them forward into a future that, while different from what he'd once imagined, was filled with purpose and meaning, a legacy of kindness that would continue to grow and touch countless lives, just as Mrs. Briggs had intended. Daniel sat at his desk in the Veterans Center, sorting through the morning mail. Most were donations and thank you notes, but one letter caught his eye, a plain white envelope with slightly messy handwriting. He opened it carefully, unfolding 3 pages of handwritten words. "Dear Mr. McCall," the letter began, "my name is Thomas Weber. I'm a single father of 2 young boys, and I'm at the end of my rope. I lost my construction job 6 months ago when the company downsized. Since then, I've been turned down everywhere because of the gap in my work history." Daniel's hands trembled slightly as he read. The words could have been his own from just a year ago. He continued reading about Thomas's struggle to keep his apartment, his boys' disappointment when he couldn't afford their school activities, and his growing desperation. Emma poked her head into his office, her backpack slung over one shoulder. "Ready for lunch, Daddy?" "Just a minute, sweetheart." Daniel reached for his phone and dialed the number at the bottom of the letter. It rang 4 times before a tired voice answered. "Mr. Weber? This is Daniel McCall from the Eleanor Briggs Veterans Center. I got your letter this morning. Could you come in today?" There was a pause on the other end. "Really?" Yes, sir. I can be there in an hour." "Perfect. Bring your boys if they're with you." Emma helped Daniel straighten up the meeting room, arranging cookies on a plate and filling water glasses. When Thomas arrived, Daniel immediately recognized the look in his eyes, that mixture of hope and defeat he used to see in his own mirror. Thomas Weber was in his mid-30s, wearing a clean but worn button-down shirt. His 2 boys, around 6 and 8, stuck close to his sides, quiet and watchful, just like Emma used to be. "Please, sit down." Daniel gestured to the comfortable chairs. "Boys, Emma can show you our recreation room if you'd like. We have some pretty cool games in there." The boys looked up at their father, who nodded. Emma led them out, already chatting about the new ping-pong table. Once they were alone, Daniel leaned forward. "Tell me your story, Thomas, the whole thing." For the next hour, Thomas shared his journey. He'd worked construction for 12 years until the company's sudden downsizing. His wife had left 3 years earlier, leaving him to raise the boys alone. Each rejection letter had chipped away at his confidence until he could barely face another interview. "I saw the article about this place in the paper," Thomas explained, his voice rough, "about how you help people get back on their feet. I know I'm not a veteran, but..." Daniel held up his hand. "We expanded our mission months ago. Single parents are absolutely part of who we serve." He pulled out a folder. "I have a proposition for you." Thomas straightened in his chair. "We're starting a new training program for our maintenance team. Full-time position, benefits included. It's not high-end construction, but it's honest work with room to grow. Would you be interested?" Yes, absolutely. Thomas's eyes grew wet. But why would you take a chance on me when no one else will? Daniel smiled softly, remembering Mrs. Briggs's words. Because sometimes the best experience is compassion. Someone took a chance on me once, when I was sitting right where you are. Over the next few weeks, Daniel watched Thomas flourish. He arrived early each morning, learned quickly, and treated everyone with respect. His boys started attending the center's after-school program, where Emma took them under her wing. One afternoon, Daniel found Thomas teaching Jake, the young intern, how to properly repair drywall. His confidence had returned, along with a smile. Emma watched from the doorway of Daniel's office as he mentored Thomas through a project plan. "Daddy," she whispered when Thomas left, "you're just like Mrs. Briggs now. You see the good in people before they see it in themselves." Daniel pulled his daughter close, remembering that rainy day when he changed a tire for a stranger. "You know what Mrs. Briggs taught me? That kindness keeps multiplying. Every time we help someone, they go on to help others. It never ends." That evening, as Thomas gathered his boys to head home, he paused in Daniel's doorway. "Mr. McCall, I just wanted to say thank you, not just for the job, but for believing in me." Daniel thought of Eleanor's proud smile, of all the lives she'd touched through her faith in others. He looked at Thomas and saw himself a year ago, a good man, finding his way back to hope. "That's what we do here," he said quietly. "We believe in people until they remember how to believe in themselves." As Thomas's pickup truck pulled away, Emma slipped her small hand into Daniel's. He squeezed it gently and whispered, "Kindness keeps multiplying." Golden afternoon sunlight spilled across the Veterans Center courtyard, casting long shadows through Mrs. Briggs's garden. The space buzzed with life and laughter as hundreds of community members gathered for the one-year anniversary celebration. Children darted between clusters of adults, their gleeful shrieks mixing with the gentle jazz music floating from speakers mounted near the pergola. Daniel McCall stood near the refreshment table, watching the scene with quiet joy. The courtyard had transformed from a construction site into a thriving sanctuary. Raised flower beds overflowed with bright blooms, all planted by volunteers. Veterans in wheelchairs chatted with young families on benches dedicated to fallen heroes. Near the fountain, Jake led a group of kids in making paper airplanes. "Daddy," Emma's voice cut through the crowd. "When are they going to do the special part?" Daniel checked his watch and smiled. "Just a few more minutes, sweetheart. Why don't you go get your bike ready?" Emma bounced with excitement before racing off toward the storage shed where her prized possession waited. The pink bicycle had been his first major purchase after the center started turning a profit. He'd surprised her with it on her 9th birthday, fulfilling the promise he'd made that difficult morning before his failed interview. Mr. Holton approached, looking distinguished in a navy suit. "Quite a turnout, Daniel. Eleanor would be proud." "Thank you, sir." Daniel shook his hand warmly. Their relationship had evolved from rejection to genuine respect. "We couldn't have done all this without your company's support." "Please." Mr. Holton waved off the gratitude. "You've taught us more about real success than quarterly reports ever could." The music faded, and Jake stepped up to the microphone. "Ladies and gentlemen, if you could gather around the memorial garden, we're ready to begin the dedication ceremony." People moved toward the curved stone wall, where a large object stood draped in blue velvet. Daniel's heart quickened as he took his place at the podium. Emma wheeled her bike to the front row, practically vibrating with anticipation. "1 year ago," Daniel began, his voice steady and warm, "this place was just an empty lot and a dream in Eleanor Briggs's heart. She saw potential where others saw problems. She believed in second chances when others saw only risk." He paused, letting his gaze drift over familiar faces, veterans who'd found housing through their programs, single parents who'd received job training, children who spent afternoons in their after-school center. "Many of you know my story. I came here first as a desperate father, rejected and doubting. But Mrs. Briggs showed me that sometimes our greatest disappointments lead us to our true purpose. She taught me that faith isn't about getting what we want. It's about trusting that something better awaits if we keep our hearts open." Jake and 2 veterans stepped forward to remove the velvet covering. There, mounted on polished granite, gleamed a bronze plaque that read, "Hope Restored, founded by Eleanor Briggs, built by Daniel McCall." Applause erupted through the crowd. Emma beamed from her pink bicycle, her hands clapping enthusiastically above her head. "This plaque," Daniel continued when the noise settled, "honors not just 2 names, but every person who believes in the power of second chances. every volunteer who gives their time, every donor who shares our vision, every person who walks through these doors seeking help and stays to help others. He stepped away from the podium and moved closer to the plaque, running his fingers over the raised letters of Eleanor's name. Mrs. Briggs used to say that kindness was its own credential. She believed that. Every rejection was just God's way of redirecting us to where we needed to be. Emma chose that moment to pedal her bike in a perfect circle around the garden path, her yellow dress fluttering behind her like sunshine given form. The crowd chuckled warmly at her impromptu demonstration of joy. "Look at this place now," Daniel gestured to the thriving center around them. What started as one woman's compassion for a stranger has grown into a community of hope. We've housed 57 veterans, helped 32 families find stability, and created a safe haven for countless children. The setting sun painted the sky in brilliant oranges and pinks, its light catching the bronze plaque and making it glow like a beacon. Daniel felt tears prick at his eyes, but he didn't try to hide them. So today, we celebrate not just what we've built, but what we've learned. That purpose often comes disguised as disappointment. That closed doors sometimes lead to open hearts. And most importantly, he paused as Emma completed another loop on her bike, waving to everyone that promises kept build bridges of trust that can transform lives. The crowd rose in a standing ovation. Jake distributed champagne flutes filled with sparkling cider for a toast. As the sun dipped lower toward the horizon, casting long golden fingers through the garden Eleanor had dreamed into being, Daniel stepped away from the crowd. He found a quiet spot near the memorial wall where Eleanor's favorite roses climbed toward the sky. Emma parked her bike and joined him, slipping her small hand into his. Together, they watched the sunset paint the clouds in brilliant hues. Daniel squeezed his daughter's hand and spoke softly, his words meant for both heaven and earth. Sometimes God's no is just a bigger yes waiting to bloom. The sky blazed with color, a celestial celebration of promises fulfilled and faith rewarded. As evening settled over the place where hope had truly been restored, what would you do if you were in their place? Comment your answer below, and let's see how you'd rewrite the ending. If you enjoyed the story of Daniel McCall, I handpicked the next story that you will enjoy. Please don't miss this one. Click here to watch it.